Hello? Is this Mr. Bennett? The voice was thin, almost lost in the shriek of sirens and the city's rumble, but it managed to pierce through. Clear, real, and scared. Richard Bennett stared at his phone, a number he didn't recognize flashing on the screen. He usually ignored calls like these, but something, a sudden vice around his heart, made him swipe to answer. Speaking. Who is this? A pause hung in the air. Then, I'm so sorry to bother you, but your son is lying on the sidewalk. Hez bleeding really bad. Richard's heart seized. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a physical stop. For a moment, his pulse flatlined. He shot up so fast his chair scraped back, slamming into the glass wall behind him. Heads swiveled across the boardroom. His assistant's tablet clattered to the floor. What did you just say? His voice was strangely calm now, dangerously so. The girl on the other end sniffled, her voice shaking but firm. He was attacked. By some older kids. They ran off. I think he hit his head. There's blood everywhere. Hez not waking up. Where are you? South Bronx. By the park near 146th and Willis, next to the basketball court. Richard didn't even bother to hang up. He just dropped the phone onto the table and bolted from the room, grabbing his coat from the rack without a word. Sir, his assistant called after him. You're in the middle of... But he was already inside the elevator, punching in the code for rooftop access. He couldn't catch his breath. Not Ethan. Not his boy. 9 minutes later, the NeuroCorps helicopter sliced through the dusk-painted Manhattan sky. Richard stared out at the fading sun, his eyes like glass, his jaw tight, his fists clenched in his lap. Memories flickered in and out of focus. Ethan's last birthday. Richard had shown up late, a drone in hand, and hadn't even stayed to watch him fly it. The boy's quiet voice that morning echoed in his head. Bye, Dad? Just those 2 words. He hadn't even looked up. Now, he might never speak again. When the chopper touched down near the park, Richard was out before the rotors had fully stopped spinning. He took off running. He hadn't run like that in a decade, but he ran now, fueled by panic. An ambulance had just pulled up. Paramedics were kneeling beside a small figure sprawled on the pavement, surrounded by cracked asphalt and dirty autumn leaves. Ethan! Richard roared, his breath raw in his throat. That's my son! He shoved past a young officer and dropped to his knees beside the stretcher. Ethan's face was deathly pale. Too pale. Blood matted his dark blonde hair, streaking his temple. One eye was swollen shut. His lips were slightly parted, dry and cracked. Richard's voice broke. Ethan! Ethan! Buddy, can you hear me? No response. A medic glanced up. Sir, please. We need some room. Hez my son, Richard choked out, his voice thick with despair. Hez my only. Another medic gently but firmly pulled him back. Sir, he has a pulse, but we have to move, and we have to move fast. As they lifted Ethan into the ambulance, Richard turned just enough to see her. She was standing maybe 15 feet away, barely taller than the metal trash can beside her. A little black girl, maybe 6 years old, swallowed up in a red hoodie. The cuffs of her jeans were soaked through. Her fingers, chapped and raw, were wrapped tightly around a cracked phone. She was shivering, something fierce. Her lips were blue from the cold, but her eyes were locked on Ethan. And in them, Richard saw something he hadn't seen in a long, long time. Real, honest-to-God human concern. He walked toward her, his steps unsteady. Are you the one who called me? She nodded, hugging herself tighter. Yes, sir. You stayed with him? I didn't want him to be alone. He was crying before he passed out. Richard swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult. He looked down at her. Her nose was bright red, her cheeks wind-chapped. She was wearing sneakers, with no socks. You should be inside somewhere warm. She shook her head stubbornly. Couldn't leave him. He blinked hard. For a second, he thought the wind was making his eyes water. "Thank you," he managed to say, reaching into his coat for his wallet. "Here, let me—" She took a step back, her eyes wide. "No, sir. I don't want any money." He froze, his hand still in his pocket. "What do you want then?" She stared at the ambulance, its lights flashing, its siren a mournful cry. I just hoped someone would care enough to come for him." The words hit him like a physical blow, a punch to the gut. "I'm Richard," he said quietly, extending a hand. "I'm Anna." She glanced up at him, and for a terrifying moment, he realized this child, this stranger, had done more for his son in the last hour than he had all week. "Where's your family?" "Grandma's home." "But she's sick. I can't stay much longer." He hesitated, then pulled off his scarf and gently wrapped it around her shoulders. She blinked up at him, surprised. "But that's yours." "He'll be okay," he said softly. "You saved my son." He turned to the paramedic. "We're going to Mount Sinai, right?" "Yes, sir." Richard stepped into the back of the ambulance, his eyes darting back one last time. Anna stood still, his scarf wrapped around her neck, her arms still crossed against the cold. She gave a tiny wave, not playful, not dramatic, just quiet and somber. Richard watched her until the ambulance doors slammed shut. That night, surrounded by the gentle beeping of machines in the dimly lit hospital room, Richard sat beside Ethan's bed, lost for words. He didn't know what to say. His son had been attacked in a city where Richard owned 3 skyscrapers and held patents for 20 different inventions. And the only one who'd stopped to help, the only one who'd shown any compassion, was a little girl who didn't even have socks. At 9:42 p.m., Richard walked slowly back down to the ER lobby. To his surprise, Anna was still there, huddled in a plastic chair, sipping from a paper cup of cocoa. His scarf was still wrapped around her neck. She looked up, her eyes wide and questioning. "Hez stable," Richard said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Still sleeping, but they think hell be okay." Anna nodded, a small, silent gesture of relief. "Good." He sat down beside her, the leather of his coat creaking as he leaned back. "You know, you didn't have to stay." "I know." He glanced at her, curious. "Why did you, then?" She shrugged, her small shoulders lifting and falling beneath the large hoodie. "I don't know." He just looked scared. "I know what that feels like." Richard's throat tightened, and he found himself unable to speak for a moment. After a long pause, he pulled out his phone. "May I?" She frowned, confused. "May you what?" "Take your picture, so I don't forget the girl who did what nobody else would." Anna smiled, a small, crooked, hesitant thing. "Just one click," he promised. Richard knew he'd never delete it. The hospital room was silent, save for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the muted sounds of nurses moving about down the hall. Richard sat still as a statue beside Ethan's bed, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The boy's face was turned slightly to the side, the bruising on his left cheekbone now deeper, cast in shadow by the fluorescent lights overhead. His breathing was shallow but steady. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, struggling to feel something other than the crushing numbness that had taken hold. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, the words feeling foreign and awkward in his mouth. "It's me, Dad." There was no response. His throat tightened. Ethan's small hand rested beside his pillow, the knuckles scraped and scabbed, his wrist marked where a nurse had drawn blood. "Doctor says you're going to be okay," Richard continued, forcing the words out. "You just need some rest. You're strong, stronger than your old man." Still, nothing. Richard leaned back and stared up at the ceiling. The cold, fluorescent light flickered, throwing sterile shadows across the room. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. Not for his son, not for any child. He had built an empire on algorithms and capital, created machines to predict markets, and revolutionize security. But in the one place it truly mattered, in this small, sterile room, he felt utterly and completely helpless. A quiet knock at the door broke the stillness. It opened gently, and a nurse stepped in, middle-aged, with kind eyes and a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Bennett, Nancy. Just checking in." He stood up quickly, his anxiety rising. "Is he improving?" She offered a small, reassuring smile. "Hes stable, no internal bleeding. CT scans are clear. It's mostly bruising and a mild concussion, but no permanent damage." Richard exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest easing just a fraction. "When will he wake up?" "It could be any time now," she said gently. "Maybe just a few more hours. Let his body rest." "Oh," she paused, then added, "your assistant dropped off a change of clothes and some food. There, at the front desk. Thank you." Nancy lingered for a moment. "I also wanted to say that little girl who called, Anna. That was brave. A lot of adults would have just walked right past." "I know," Richard said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "She's still down in the lobby. I think she's waiting for someone." He hesitated, then asked, "Is her grandmother here yet?" Nancy shook her head. "We tried calling the number she gave us, but no answer. She might not have anyone." Richard nodded slowly, rubbing a hand wearily across his face. "Ill, check on her." Downstairs, the ER lobby was almost deserted. It was nearly midnight. The vending machines hummed quietly in the corner, and the security guard had dozed off behind the desk. Anna sat curled up in the same plastic chair, her legs tucked beneath her, Richard's scarf still wrapped around her neck. The cocoa was gone, replaced by a half-eaten granola bar. She looked up as Richard approached. "Hi," she said, her voice softer now, heavy with fatigue. "Hes stable," Richard told her, his voice gentle. "The doctors think he'll wake up soon." Anna nodded, her eyes flicking down to her sneakers. "You've been here a long time," he added, his concern growing. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" "My grandma's phone don't always work," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Sometimes the battery dies, or the minutes run out. I usually just walk home." At this hour, she shrugged, as if it were nothing. "It's not that far. I know how to stay out of trouble." Richard frowned, his worry intensifying. "You're 6. 6.5. She corrected him. He almost smiled, but the urge faded quickly. The thought of this little girl walking home alone at night in the Bronx hit him hard, right in the gut. "Where do you live?" he asked. 146th and Cortlandt. It's a few blocks." "He'll take you," he said, making up his mind. "Come on, he'll make sure you get home safe." She looked uncertain, her expression hesitant. "You sure? Your son's upstairs. He'll be okay for an hour, but I wouldn't be if I let you leave alone." Anna stood up stiffly, her legs aching from sitting for so long. Richard gently placed a hand on her shoulder to steady her. Outside, the cold air hit them immediately. Richard slipped off his coat and draped it over her small frame without a word. They walked in silence, past shuttered bodegas and flickering streetlights. Garbage bags lined the curbs, overflowing with trash. The city felt older here, worn down, breathing slowly in the dark. "Was your son really going to die?" Anna asked suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. Richard swallowed hard, the lump returning to his throat. "He could have, if you hadn't called me." He let the sentence hang in the air between them. Anna didn't say anything. They reached a run-down apartment building with cracked steps and a rusty buzzer. Anna led him up 2 flights of stairs and stopped at a door marked 3B. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. "I think Grandma's sleeping." Richard crouched down beside her, his voice low and earnest. "Anna, listen to me." She looked at him, her eyes wide and serious. "I don't know what your life is like. I don't pretend to. But I want you to know something. You didn't just help Ethan today. You saved him, and I won't forget that." Anna smiled shyly, a little unsure of herself. "Thanks." He stood up, towering over her. "Will you be okay tonight?" She nodded, her expression resigned. "We always are." He handed her a small card from his wallet. "This has my number on it. You can call me if you need anything at all." She stared at it for a moment, then tucked it into her hoodie pocket. As she slipped inside the apartment, Richard stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the city seeping through the cracked windows. Distant sirens, a dog barking, a lullaby drifting from a television behind one of the doors. He didn't know why, but he felt a tremor of something shifting inside him, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Gratitude. Back at the hospital, Ethan was stirring. Nancy met Richard outside the room, smiling. He's waking up. Richard rushed inside. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, glassy and dazed. He blinked up at the ceiling, then slowly, painfully, turned his head. "Dad?" he whispered, his voice weak. "I'm here," Richard said, relief washing over him as he grasped his son's hand. "I'm right here." Ethan's brow furrowed, his gaze searching the room. "Where's the girl?" Richard's breath caught in his throat. "Anna?" Ethan nodded, his eyes closing briefly. "She stayed with me. She told me I'd be okay." Richard smiled faintly, gripping his son's hand tighter. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It will be." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't over. Not the pain, not the injustice, and not Anna's story. That was only just beginning. The morning light streamed softly through the narrow hospital window, illuminating Ethan's pale face. Richard sat beside him, still in the same rumpled clothes, his shirt wrinkled, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. A nurse had offered him a fresh change from the gift shop, but he had refused. There were more pressing matters on his mind. Ethan was awake now, weak but conscious. His voice was scratchy and strained when he spoke, his words slow but clear. "She didn't leave," he said again, turning his head slightly toward his father. "The girl? She stayed with me the whole time." "I know," Richard murmured, his heart aching. "She's the one who called me." Ethan's eyes searched his father's face, seeking answers. "Why was she there?" Richard hesitated, unsure how to explain. "She found you after the attack. She called for help. She did more than anyone else." Ethan looked away, his expression troubled. "The other kids?" They just laughed. One of them filmed it on his phone. A heavy silence settled in the room. Richard's stomach clenched, his jaw tightened with anger. The police had been vague in their report. Teenage suspects, unknown motives. No arrests yet, but hearing it from Ethan made it brutally real. A cruel and calculated attack. "I'm so sorry, son," Richard whispered, his voice filled with remorse. "I should have—" He stopped, the words failing him. What could he say? That he should have been there? That, no matter how much money or power he possessed, he couldn't undo what had happened? "You came," Ethan said quietly, his gaze meeting his father's. "That's what matters." Richard turned away, blinking hard to fight back the tears that threatened to spill. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his assistant. "Board meeting postponed. Media requesting statement. Call me as soon as possible." He shoved the phone back into his coat pocket without reading the rest, his mind focused on his son. There was a gentle knock at the door. Nurse Nancy stepped in, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Bennett?" she said softly. "We need a few minutes to run some tests. You can wait in the family room if you'd like." Richard stood and gently squeezed Ethan's hand. "I'll be right back." Outside, he didn't go to the family room. Instead, he walked toward the front desk and asked the question that had been haunting him since dawn. "Is Anna still here?" The receptionist looked up from her computer monitor, her expression tired. "The little girl from last night?" "Yes," she frowned. "She left early this morning, said she had to go check on her grandmother. She refused a ride, walked out on her own." Richard nodded slowly, his concern deepening. "Did she leave an address?" The woman hesitated, then typed a few keys on her keyboard. She listed 34 East 146th Street, apartment 3B. He recognized it instantly, the same building he had walked her to last night. But something gnawed at him, a growing unease that he couldn't shake. He pulled out his phone and called the number Anna had given the nurse. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again, with the same result. "Do you have any contacts at Child Protective Services?" he asked the receptionist, his voice urgent. She blinked, surprised by the request. "Excuse me? I need to report a potential case, a minor, possibly without a legal guardian." She raised an eyebrow, but nodded and slid a contact form across the counter. 40 minutes later, Richard stood once more outside apartment 3B, his anxiety mounting with each passing second. This time, the hallway smelled different, sharper, heavier. The acrid scent of something burnt lingered in the air. He knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, louder, calling out her name. "Anna?" Still nothing. He pressed his ear to the door, straining to hear any sound from within. Silence. Then, a faint noise. A cough, deep and scratchy. He tried the doorknob. To his surprise, it turned. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open, slowly, cautiously. Inside, the apartment was dim, the air thick with dust. Specks of dust danced in the weak sunlight filtering through the grimy window. The heat barely worked, and a flickering television cast eerie shadows on the peeling walls. On a worn couch in the corner, an elderly woman lay huddled under a pile of mismatched blankets, her breathing labored and shallow. "Ma'am?" Richard approached her slowly, his voice soft. "I'm looking for Anna." The woman blinked, her eyes dazed and unfocused. "She ain't here. Went to the store, or maybe to school. I don't know. Hard to keep track sometimes." He crouched down beside her, his concern growing. "Are you her grandmother?" "Suppose so," she murmured, her voice weak and raspy. "Ain't nobody else here. It's just me and her, and the rent man knocking every other week." Richard looked around the apartment. It was clean, but sparsely furnished, almost empty. There was no food on the counter, just a single, dirty bowl in the sink. "Do you have any other family? Anyone who helps you?" She shook her head slowly, coughing again. "Just Anna. She's a good girl. Smarter than me, that's for sure." He stood up, his mind racing. "Is it okay if I wait here for her?" The woman nodded faintly and drifted off to sleep again. He stayed for 20 minutes, then 30, then a full hour. But there was no sign of Anna. He stepped outside into the hallway and called his assistant, his voice filled with urgency. "I need your help locating a child. Her name is Anna Green, 6 years old. She lives at this address. No birth certificate or school registration that I can find. I need eyes on her, as soon as possible." "That's not exactly legal, sir." "I'm not asking you to break the law," Richard snapped, his patience wearing thin. "Just find someone who knows how to move fast." "Understood." Back at the hospital, Ethan was eating Jell-O when Richard returned, his face pale but alert. "Where'd you go?" he asked, his voice still weak. "I was looking for someone," Richard said, avoiding his son's gaze. "She wasn't home." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "She told me something before I blacked out. I don't know if it was real or not." "What did she say?" Richard asked, his curiosity piqued. "She said, even when no one helps you, you help. You don't need a reason." Richard sat back in the chair, the weight of the day settling onto his shoulders once again. "She's right," he said quietly, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "And now, it's my turn." "Will she be okay?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Richard didn't answer right away. The truth was, he didn't know. "Not yet," he said finally. "But I'm going to make sure she will be." He glanced at the photo on his phone again, the one from the hospital of Anna wrapped in his scarf, half smiling, her eyes tired but proud. He didn't know how, but he was going to find her. Not because it would make headlines, not because it would clear his conscience, but because someone had to, and this time he would be the one who didn't look away. The rain started softly, as if the city itself was trying not to disturb anyone. Gentle, steady drops tapped against the hospital windows, creating a soothing rhythm. Inside, the low hum of machines and the occasional beeping of monitors provided a constant background noise that had become strangely familiar to Richard over the last 2 days. Ethan was asleep again, his breathing even and relaxed. The doctors were pleased with his progress. They said he might be discharged within the next 48 hours. But Richard's mind wasn't on that. It was on a little girl with a cracked phone and 2 big sneakers who had vanished into the city like a ghost, leaving no trace behind. Anna hadn't come home. Not that anyone had really noticed. He had sent a team of private investigators to canvass the neighborhood, to check local stores, to speak with teachers at the nearby elementary school. Even though no official record of Anna attending had been found, no enrollment forms, no birth certificate, no paper trail of any kind. The grandmother had been hospitalized the night before after collapsing in her apartment. Severe dehydration, pneumonia, no insurance. She remained sedated in a different wing of the hospital, still unaware that Anna was missing. The apartment had been sealed off for inspection by the authorities. There was no sign of forced entry, no notes, nothing to indicate where she might have gone. It's like she just disappeared, his lead investigator had told him that morning, his voice frustrated. Richard leaned against the large window of the hospital's family waiting area, watching the raindrops race down the glass. The sight reminded him of something Ethan had once said when he was 5 years old. Rain looks like the sky is crying, but it doesn't make any sound. He rubbed his temples wearily, trying to ease the persistent headache that had been plaguing him for days. Footsteps approached behind him. "Mr. Bennett?" His assistant's voice came softly, breaking his concentration. "We got a hit." He turned sharply, his heart leaping with a sudden surge of hope. "Where?" "A woman down on 149th Street says a little girl matching Anna's description came by her corner store yesterday morning. She bought crackers and a juice box, paying with loose coins. No adult was with her." Richard held his breath, waiting for more information. "Did she say where she went? Did she mention anything about where she was going?" "She said the girl asked if she could sleep in the alley behind the store. When the woman told her no, the girl just walked off, heading eastbound." Richard closed his eyes, his stomach twisting with a mixture of relief and dread. "That was nearly 24 hours ago. We're expanding the search radius, and we're coordinating with the local shelters and outreach programs. But, sir, if I may," he raised an eyebrow, inviting him to continue. "We've contacted Child Protective Services. They've opened a formal inquiry into the situation. They want to take the grandmother into custody when she recovers." Richard frowned, his jaw tightening. "They'll separate them?" "Most likely, yes." He stood straighter, his voice firm. "I won't allow that. Not after everything Anna's done." His assistant hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "With all due respect, sir, the system doesn't care who you are. If there's no record of her, no official paperwork, she's just another name on a list, another case file lost in the bureaucracy." Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination. "Then, well, change the list. Well, rewrite the rules." He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. He returned to Anna's neighborhood, this time dressed in a worn hoodie and faded jeans, his face barely visible beneath the brim of a baseball cap. No security detail, no entourage, no trace of his wealth or power. He wanted to see it as she saw it, raw, exposed, and vulnerable. Alone and feeling insignificant, he walked down Cortlandt Avenue, past the brightly lit deli where Anna might have spent her hard-earned coins, past a row of overflowing dumpsters teeming with refuse, past the basketball court, still faintly stained with the dried blood of his son's attack. Then, in the dim shadows of a doorway, he saw it. A small bundle huddled in a stairwell, partially covered by a torn garbage bag, a flash of red, dirt-smudged cheeks, his breath caught in his throat. "Anna," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the city's hum. She flinched at the sound of his voice, curling tighter into herself. "Go away," she mumbled, her voice muffled. "It's me, Richard." She turned slowly, her movements stiff and wary. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her lips cracked and bleeding. The scarf Head given her was now dirty and stained, the ends dragging on the grimy concrete. Her voice was small and filled with distrust. "I didn't want anyone to find me." "Why not?" he asked gently, crouching down beside her, trying to appear non-threatening. "'Cause they'll take me away from Grandma. I know how it goes. I've seen it happen with the Jackson kids. One day they were here, and then poof, they were gone." His heart cracked clean in half, overwhelmed by a wave of sorrow and compassion. "Him not them," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And you're not alone anymore." She looked at him suspiciously, her eyes narrowed. "Why do you care? Your kid's safe now. You don't need me anymore." Richard didn't answer immediately, searching for the right words to express the complex emotions churning within him. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and sincere. "You remind me of someone I forgot I used to be. Someone who didn't walk past pain, someone who actually gave a damn about others." She looked down, fiddling with a loose thread on her sleeve, her expression unreadable. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "Just for tonight. You can sleep, eat a decent meal, take a hot shower. Tomorrow, well, figure it out together." Anna didn't move, her body tense and resistant. Richard reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through his photos until he found the one he was looking for. "Remember this?" he asked, holding up the phone so she could see the screen. It was the picture Head taken of her in the hospital, the scarf wrapped around her neck, that quiet, hesitant half-smile gracing her face. "You said I could take just one picture. Well, I look at this photo and I think, if she could care for someone else when no one else cared for her, maybe there's still hope for the rest of us." She didn't say anything, but he saw her eyes glisten with unshed tears. Finally, after a long moment of hesitation, she stood up, brushing the dirt off her jeans. They rode in silence to Richard's elegant townhouse on the Upper West Side. The driver, clearly taken aback by the sight of a child in ragged clothing getting into the back seat with his billionaire employer, remained silent. Richard was grateful for his discretion. When they arrived at the townhouse, Anna paused at the threshold, seemingly uncertain. "It's okay," he reassured her. "Come in." Inside, the house was warm and inviting, despite its modern decor. A fire crackled gently in the living room fireplace. Framed photographs adorned the walls, mostly recent snapshots. There was Ethan with his robotics kit, Ethan at the lake house, and Ethan with his mother from a time when she still smiled, before the divorce. Anna stood in the foyer, resembling a stray dog, unsure whether to flee or stay put. "First rule," Richard said softly, "you don't have to ask permission to eat." She looked up at him. "Second rule, if you're scared, say so. No one gets mad." Her shoulders relaxed ever so slightly. He then led her to the guest room, showed her the bathroom, and left a pair of Ethan's old pajamas, neatly folded, on the bed. "Sleep as long as you want, we'll talk tomorrow." Anna nodded, but before he could leave, she called out softly, "Mr. Bennett?" He turned back. "Is it okay if I see Ethan tomorrow?" He smiled gently. "He asked about you?" She didn't return the smile, but her eyes softened as Richard closed the door behind him. He leaned against the door and exhaled deeply. He didn't know what he had just set in motion, but somehow this little girl had entered his life like a storm. Messy, raw, and impossible to ignore. And for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. Anna awoke to complete silence. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure of her surroundings. The room felt excessively soft, warm, and clean. The bed beneath her felt like a cloud compared to the worn-out couch cushions back in her grandmother's cramped apartment. A subtle scent of lavender permeated the air, and soft light streamed through the tall window. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. The red hoodie she had clung to for days was neatly folded at the foot of the bed, alongside Ethan's pajamas, too big, but warm. Outside the door, she could hear faint voices, a woman speaking softly, followed by Richard's deeper voice responding. She crept down the hallway barefoot, moving as quietly as she always did when her grandmother was sleeping. As she reached the end of the hall, the voices grew clearer. "She'll need a physical evaluation, and we still can't find any official record of her birth," the woman was saying. "If CPS gets involved now, you may lose any chance of keeping her with the grandmother." Richard's reply was calm but firm. "Then we don't let them take her. I'll provide temporary guardianship if I have to." Anna froze, the word guardianship echoing in her mind. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The woman turned and saw her first, middle-aged, dressed in a sharp suit, with a gentle smile. "There you are, sweetheart. Good morning." Richard looked up, surprised but not startled. "Anna, did you sleep okay?" She nodded, her gaze fixed on the woman. "Who is she?" "This is Diane," Richard said, stepping closer. "She's a lawyer, a very good one. She's helping me." "Help you?" Anna crossed her arms defensively. "I don't need a lawyer, I just want to see my grandma." "You will," Diane said quickly. "She's still at the hospital, but we have to make sure you're safe in the meantime." Anna frowned, suspicion clouding her face. "Safe from who?" Richard crouched down to meet her eyes. "Not everyone's trying to hurt you, Anna. Some people just don't know how to help." She studied his face intently. "You're not like them." "I've been like them," he said softly. "That's why I'm trying not to be now." Later that afternoon, Richard brought Anna back to the hospital. Ethan was sitting up in bed, engrossed in a tablet game. He looked up and grinned as soon as he saw her. "Hey," he said, setting the tablet aside. "You found her." Anna stepped into the room shyly, clutching a paper bag containing the lunch Richard had provided. "Hey." Ethan scooted over, patting the empty space beside him on the bed. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down carefully. "You look better," she said. "I feel better, thanks to you." They sat in silence for a moment, both staring at the television, which was playing a muted cartoon. Then Ethan turned to her. "Why did you help me?" Anna blinked, surprised by the question. "What do you mean? You didn't know me?" She shrugged, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Didn't matter. You were hurt." Ethan looked down, a shadow crossing his face. "A lot of people saw me. No one stopped." "I noticed," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "That's why I don't wait around for grown-ups anymore." Richard, who had been standing by the door, swallowed hard, the truth in her words hitting him like a physical blow. The nurse entered the room, giving them some privacy. Richard stepped out into the hallway, running a hand down his face. He was accustomed to making difficult decisions, mergers, boardroom battles, stock crises, but this was different. This was personal, and for the first time in years, he felt the heavy weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. Not just on paper, but in the deepest part of himself. Later, in the hospital cafeteria, Anna sat across from Ethan at a small table, both working on grilled cheese sandwiches. She was more talkative now, sharing stories about her school, which didn't have enough books, about how her grandmother used to be a choir singer, and about her longing to learn to draw but lacking real pencils. Ethan listened attentively, then reached into his bedside drawer, pulled out a pen, and handed it to her. "It's not a pencil," he said, "but it writes smooth." Anna smiled, touching the pen to her palm as if it were a precious jewel. "Thanks." Richard watched from a distance, unnoticed, his heart swelling with a mixture of hope and gratitude. That evening, after Anna had returned to the townhouse, she wandered into Richard's study while he was on a video call. Books lined the shelves, some leather-bound and old, others newer and more modern. She trailed her fingers along the spines, pausing at one with gold lettering. "Leadership Through Crisis." She scoffed softly. Richard ended his call and noticed her standing there, her back to him. "Find something interesting?" he asked. She didn't turn around. "You always been rich?" He paused, a flicker of something crossing his face. "No. I grew up in Detroit, small house, single mother. No heat half the time." Anna looked over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. Then, why'd you forget? He blinked, taken aback by the question. Forget what it's like to be small and cold and scared. He sat on the edge of his desk, hands folded in front of him. Maybe because I got tired of being scared. Maybe I thought money would fix everything. Did it? He looked at her for a long time, his gaze intense and searching. No, it didn't. She turned back to the shelf, her fingers tracing the gold lettering once more. I don't think I like books with gold on them. They always sound like they're lying. Richard chuckled softly. Fair enough. Anna reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a small notebook, its corners bent and worn, the cover torn. I write stuff down, she said, holding it out to him. Stuff I want to remember. He nodded, intrigued. Can I see? She hesitated for a moment, then flipped it open and showed him a page. It was a list. Don't trust people who smile too fast. Always count your change. The alley behind Martinez has a dry corner when it rains. Sometimes people care, but too late. If you find someone who helps without asking why, don't forget them. He read it silently, his heart aching with a mixture of sadness and admiration. Then he looked up at her, a gentle smile gracing his lips. You forgot one, he said. She tilted her head, puzzled. Sometimes you have to let people help you, even when you're scared. Anna gave a soft shrug, her expression unconvinced. I'll think about it. That night, after she had gone to bed, Richard sat alone in the study, the weight of the day pressing down on him. The photo of Anna on his phone stared back at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of vulnerability and defiance. He picked up the gold-lettered book on leadership and tossed it aside, the sound echoing in the silent room. Then, with a newfound sense of purpose, he opened a new file on his computer. Title: Project Guardian. It was time to build something that truly mattered. Not for shareholders, not for legacy, but for one child who had reminded him what it meant to feel again. And he wasn't going to let her disappear. Not now. Not ever. Richard Bennett wasn't a man easily rattled. He had faced congressional hearings, hostile takeovers, and billion-dollar lawsuits. But sitting across from a state child welfare representative with a clipboard and a forced smile was making him sweat. We appreciate your concern, Mr. Bennett, the woman said, her voice clipped and professional. Her badge read, S. Jacobs, CPS. But there's a process in place. We'll handle the investigation from here. They were seated in his private office, one of the quiet, wood-paneled rooms on the top floor of his company's Manhattan tower. He had insisted on meeting here, hoping the weight of the space would lend him some advantage. But Jacobs remained unmoved. I understand procedure, Richard said, folding his hands, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. But I'm not talking about theory. I'm talking about a child who is currently in my care because she had nowhere else to go. She's not officially in your care, Jacobs corrected, her tone precise. Not yet. Richard leaned forward, his intensity growing. Do you know what she's been through? Have you spoken to her? Have you walked the streets she walks every day? The woman blinked, seemingly unfazed by his impassioned plea. We don't operate emotionally, Mr. Bennett. Our job is to protect children within the framework of the law. If her grandmother is deemed medically unfit and there is no known next of kin, Anna will enter foster care. That system is already overburdened and underfunded, Richard countered, his voice rising slightly. You'll throw her into a home with strangers when she has someone who you're not family. Jacobs interrupted, her voice cool and dismissive. I will be, he said quickly, his voice tightening with determination. I've already initiated emergency guardianship proceedings. My legal team is filing the paperwork as we speak. The agent exhaled, her tone softening slightly, perhaps sensing his sincerity. I'm not here to make enemies, Mr. Bennett, but I've seen dozens of cases like this. One good deed doesn't automatically make someone a parent. Richard's voice dropped, his eyes fixed on hers. This isn't a deed. This is a promise. Jacobs stared at him for a moment, seemingly weighing his words, then nodded politely and stood. "I'll be in touch, but I suggest you prepare for a full evaluation. Background checks, home visits, psychological assessments, everything." "Fine," he said, his jaw tight. "You'll find what you're looking for." As she left, Richard turned to the window. His reflection stared back at him, his eyes sunken, his tie loose. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man standing at the edge of something terrifying, uncertain but resolute. He didn't care. That evening, Anna stood at the foot of Ethan's hospital bed, holding a deck of Uno cards. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Ethan grinned, his face pale but bright. "I'm injured. Be gentle." "No promises," she retorted, shuffling the cards with practiced ease. Richard watched from the doorway, a smile tugging at his lips as they began to play. Laughter echoed between the beeps and hums of the monitors and medical equipment, filling the sterile room with warmth. Ethan accused her of cheating. Anna called him a sore loser. For the first time in days, Richard saw a hint of carefree childhood return to their faces. After 3 rounds and 2 intense challenges over a draw-4 card, Anna sat back, triumphant. "Told you," she said smugly. "You're a card shark." Ethan groaned dramatically. "How do you keep winning?" "I grew up hustling kids on the stoop," she said with a knowing smirk. "You learn fast or go hungry." Richard stepped into the room with a smile. "Dinner's ready if you're both up for it. I had something brought in." Ethan perked up, his eyes lighting up with anticipation. "Is it real food or hospital food disguised as real food?" Richard chuckled, amused by his skepticism. "Italian lasagna and garlic bread, with chocolate pudding if you clean your plate." Ethan gave Anna a warning look. "Don't race. He's serious about the pudding." Later that night, with Ethan resting again and the dishes cleared away, Anna wandered into the guest bedroom at the townhouse. Richard found her sitting on the floor beside the window, gazing at the distant traffic below. He sat down beside her, saying nothing for a moment, allowing her to gather her thoughts. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "They're going to take me, aren't they?" He looked at her, his heart aching at the fear etched on her face. Her small shoulders were rigid, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "They're going to try," he admitted, his voice soft but firm. "But I won't let them." She turned to him, her eyes guarded, searching for any hint of deception. "Why?" "Because you matter," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Because you saved my son's life. Because I believe you deserve more than what the system is offering." Her lips trembled, and tears threatened to spill over. "What if I mess up?" "You will," he said, offering a reassuring smile. "Everyone does. But that doesn't mean you stop deserving care." Anna was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the city lights twinkling in the distance. "When I was 5, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "They almost took me away once before. Said Grandma wasn't doing enough, but she loved me. She tried so hard. I know she did. She'd sing me to sleep even when her lungs hurt. She gave me her half of the soup when we ran out of food. People don't see that stuff," she continued, her voice laced with bitterness. "They just see what's broken." Richard nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Maybe that's why it takes someone who's been broken to see what matters." She looked at him, her gaze piercing. "You?" He smiled softly, acknowledging the truth in her words. "More than you know." The next day, Richard's legal team filed for emergency custody. It was an uphill battle from the start. CPS pushed back, questioning his motives and citing public image concerns. Media outlets caught wind of the story, twisting it into a sensational headline. "Billionaire rescues street child who saved his son." But Richard remained steadfast. He didn't give interviews. He didn't make statements. He made promises, and he intended to keep them. 2 days later, Grandma Mabel awoke in her hospital bed, her eyes fluttering open weakly. Richard was there, holding a bouquet of daffodils. Anna's idea. Mabel blinked, her gaze unfocused. You again? He smiled, offering a gentle nod. Yes, ma'am. A sigh escaped her lips. Anna's safe? He nodded reassuringly. Anna's safe. Her face, etched with years of hardship, seemed to soften slightly. They going to take her from me? They want to, Richard said, his voice honest and direct. But I'm fighting it. Mabel's eyes filled with tears, her voice cracking with emotion. Don't let them put her in some stranger's house. Protect that child. She's got fire, but she's scared. She needs someone who sees both. Oh, I do, Richard said, his voice filled with conviction. She stared at him, measuring something behind his eyes, searching for a truth she desperately needed to believe in. Then she nodded slowly, a glimmer of hope flickering in her gaze. Promise me you won't let her disappear. I swear, he said, his voice unwavering. Mabel closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her wrinkled cheek. She always said you were real. He frowned, puzzled by her words. What do you mean? Shed watched those news clips of you on television, talking about saving the world with tech and money. She said, one day he's going to show up. He's going to show up for someone like me. I thought it was silly. A lump formed in Richard's throat, his chest tightening with a mix of sadness and gratitude. It wasn't, he said softly. He stood, placing the flowers in a vase beside her bed. I'll take care of her, he said, his voice filled with a solemn promise. And for the first time in years, Richard Bennett, a man who could predict markets, influence elections, and bend the world to his will, realized that his most important work wouldn't be patented or sold. It would be protected, one child at a time. 2 weeks had passed since Anna first stepped into Richard's world, and already the rhythm of both their lives had irrevocably changed. She now had a room of her own at the townhouse, no longer just a guest room, but a space with a nameplate she had proudly crafted from construction paper and glitter, Anna's place. Knock before entering. The walls, once blank and cold, now held her drawings, sunsets, trees, her grandmother's smiling face, and Ethan's goofy grin. Each line was crooked and imperfect, but filled with a raw, vibrant life. Ethan, now fully recovered and back home, had become her closest friend. The two spent hours building elaborate Lego cities, passionately debating superhero rankings, and plotting out elaborate comic book stories on the living room floor, their imaginations running wild. But outside the newfound comfort and security of their makeshift family, the world continued to turn, indifferent and often cruel. Richard sat in the polished marble conference room of the family court of Manhattan, the silence heavy and expectant. His attorney, Diane, sat beside him, calmly flipping through a file thick with affidavits, health records, witness statements, and heartfelt letters of support. Across from them, the CPS legal team sat with stiff posture and unreadable expressions, their faces betraying nothing of their intentions. The judge, an older black woman named Judge Marilyn Cook, adjusted her glasses and glanced at Richard, her gaze sharp and assessing. Mr. Bennett, she said, her voice steady and measured. You're asking this court to grant emergency guardianship of a minor with no legal relation to you, no prior contact, and no official adoption in motion. Why? Richard leaned forward slightly, meeting her gaze with unwavering conviction. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times, carefully choosing his words. Because she saved my son's life, he said plainly, his voice echoing in the hushed room. And I realize that while I have every luxury in the world, she has none. She was invisible. But she matters, not just to me, but to anyone who believes a child's value isn't defined by a zip code or a birth certificate. Judge Cook's eyes didn't leave his, her expression unwavering. That's a noble answer, Mr. Bennett. But this court deals in facts, not sentiments. Children can't live on promises. I'm not offering promises, Richard replied, his voice resolute. I'm offering a life. A heavy silence descended upon the room, broken only by the soft rustling of papers. Diane slid a folder forward, placing it on the table before the judge. Your Honor, within this file, you'll find a detailed breakdown of the support structure Mr. Bennett has created for Anna. Private tutoring, therapy, comprehensive medical care, a secured trust fund, and, importantly, ongoing coordination with her grandmother's medical team to ensure future reunification is possible. One of the CPS lawyers cleared her throat, her voice laced with skepticism. Your Honor, with respect, this feels more like charity than parental readiness. Mr. Bennett has no experience raising children beyond his own. He's also a public figure under constant media scrutiny. That kind of attention can be incredibly damaging to a vulnerable child. Richard's eyes narrowed, his patience wearing thin. She's already been damaged, he countered, his voice low and intense, not by the press but by being forgotten, by being ignored. Judge Cook raised her hand, silencing the escalating exchange. Mr. Bennett, I need to be sure you understand what you're asking. This isn't a headline, this is a lifetime. I know, he said, his voice low but firm, his eyes fixed on hers. And I'm ready for it. She sat back in her chair, contemplative, her gaze lingering on his face. He'll take it under advisement. A decision will be made within 48 hours. That evening, back at the townhouse, Anna was unusually quiet and withdrawn. She sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a soft blanket, staring out at the darkening skyline, her small frame hunched over. Richard approached with 2 mugs, one filled with hot cocoa, the other with chamomile tea, knowing she was anxious. He handed her the cocoa, offering a gentle smile. "Storm's coming," he said softly. She didn't respond right away, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Do you think they'll let me stay?" "I hope so," he said honestly, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and pleading. "You don't know?" He shook his head slowly. "No one does. Not yet. The judge has to look at everything before deciding." Anna nodded slowly, absorbing his words, her expression clouded with worry. "I heard CPS talking the last time they came," she confided, her voice barely a whisper. "They think I'm just looking for a meal ticket. Like I'm using you." Richard knelt beside her, his heart aching at her insecurity. "You're not," he said firmly, his voice filled with conviction. "And you don't have to prove that to anyone. But what if they don't care?" she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "What if they send me somewhere far away? Somewhere I don't know anyone?" He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze filled with warmth and understanding. Then he placed a hand gently over hers, his touch reassuring. "Then I'll find you again." Tears streamed down her face, unchecked and unashamed. "Promise?" "I don't make promises I can't keep," he said softly, his eyes reflecting the city lights. She leaned into his shoulder, finally allowing herself to cry. Not from pain, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of finally being believed, finally being safe. The next morning, Anna and Ethan were having breakfast, pancakes and strawberries. When the doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the quiet house, Richard opened the door to find Diane standing on the porch, holding a thin envelope. "They moved faster than expected," she said, handing it to him, her voice tight with anticipation. He opened it without a word, his hands trembling slightly. Diane watched his eyes scan the contents, her breath held in her chest. "What does it say?" He looked up, his expression a mixture of disbelief and relief. "She ruled in our favor," he said, his voice quiet, almost stunned. "I have emergency guardianship." Diane smiled, her face breaking into a wide grin. "It's temporary, for 90 days, but it's a major win, Richard. It buys us time." Richard nodded slowly, absorbing the news, his mind racing with possibilities. Then, his expression shifted, a new emotion creeping into his eyes, an unfamiliar mix of relief and fear. "Now I have to live up to it." When he told Anna, she didn't scream or jump for joy. She simply stood there, clutching the hem of her shirt, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "You mean I can stay? For now?" He nodded, his gaze locking with hers. "The judge said we have 90 days to show this works." Anna looked at him, searching for any cracks in his resolve, any hint of doubt in his voice. "Will you still want me?" "After 90 days, he'll want you for 9,000, he said, his voice unwavering, his eyes filled with a fierce protectiveness. She ran into his arms, burying her face in his chest, her small body trembling with emotion. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, home wasn't something you were born into. Maybe sometimes home found you. But elsewhere, in a forgotten corner of the Bronx, behind a rusted metal door, a man with yellowed teeth and a crooked scar tapped a cheap phone against his palm, his eyes narrowed with malice. Head heard the story, read the sensational headlines, and watched the girl on the news, his resentment growing with each passing day. "I know her," he muttered, his voice raspy and menacing. Another man looked up, his expression curious. "That the same kid who used to steal from old Mrs. Green's purse?" He nodded, his lips curling into a sneer. "She's got herself a rich daddy now. Looks like she forgot where she came from." The man grinned slowly, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Maybe it's time someone reminded her. And just like that, the past Anna had desperately tried to escape began to stir, its shadows stretching towards her newfound happiness. Not everyone was ready to let her go. Not everyone was willing to let her forget. 3 weeks into Anna's new life, things had begun to settle into a comfortable rhythm, almost bordering on normal. She had a morning routine now, something she had never experienced before. She would wake up at 7:30, brush her teeth in a bathroom with heated floors, pour cereal into a bowl that wasn't chipped or cracked, and sit across from Ethan as they watched cartoons and argued over who got the last blueberry waffle. Some mornings, she helped the housekeeper fold towels, learning the proper way to smooth out the wrinkles. Other mornings, she spent hours in the library, tracing maps and old atlases and trying to imagine what Paris or Seattle smelled like, her mind wandering to far-off places she only dreamed of visiting. Richard had enrolled her in a private tutoring program at home, ensuring she received the education she deserved, and her assigned teacher, Miss Alvarez, treated her like a budding scientist, a curious mind eager to learn, not a charity case to be pitied. Richard had even let her help design a mural for the office hallway in his foundation's new building, giving her a voice and a sense of ownership. She chose sunflowers, bold and bright, because they always look for the light, she said, her voice filled with simple wisdom. But the shadows didn't disappear completely. Not really. They lingered at the edges of her vision, a constant reminder of the life she had left behind. That Saturday evening, as the wind swept golden leaves across the driveway of the Bennett townhouse, painting the manicured lawn in hues of amber and crimson, Anna stood by the mail slot, sorting through the daily bundle, her brow furrowed in concentration. Most of the envelopes were boring. Bills, legal updates, a letter from the hospital, the mundane realities of adult life. But one envelope stood out from the rest, its appearance unsettlingly out of place. It had no stamp, no return address, just her name printed on the front in shaky, uneven black marker. Anna Green. She hesitated, her heart fluttering with a sense of unease. She didn't tell Richard about it, a silent alarm bell ringing in her mind. Instead, she quickly slipped the letter into her hoodie pocket and ran upstairs to the safety of her room. Later, behind the closed door of her bedroom, the letter lay on the desk. With trembling hands, she opened it. The paper was wrinkled and torn from a cheap notebook, its surface rough to the touch. The handwriting was jagged and messy, but she recognized it instantly, a chilling wave of recognition washing over her. The message was short and chilling. "You don't belong with them. You forgot who you are. Come back before someone reminds you the hard way." There was no name, no signature, but she didn't need one. She knew exactly who had sent it. Reggie. He used to hang around her old block, always lurking in the shadows, a menacing presence. He was in his late 22s, always high or looking for someone who was, his eyes constantly darting around. Had helped her once when her grocery bag ripped, the gesture initially seeming kind, but then he demanded that she run errands for him, delivering things she didn't ask about, picking up things she didn't understand, his demands growing bolder with each passing day. Shed stopped helping him weeks before the fateful night she found Ethan, her fear outweighing her sense of obligation. But she hadn't forgotten the way he looked at her when she told him no, that last time they spoke. It wasn't anger she saw in his eyes, but a sense of ownership, a possessiveness that chilled her to the bone. And now, he wanted her back, wanted to reclaim what he believed was his. Downstairs, Richard was in the study, reviewing foundation reports and zoning approvals, his brow furrowed in concentration as he immersed himself in his work. Anna came in quietly, her footsteps barely audible on the thick carpet, and perched on the edge of the armchair, her posture tense and uneasy. He glanced up, his expression softening as he saw her. "Hey, kiddo, everything all right?" She nodded too quickly, her smile forced and unconvincing. He narrowed his eyes, sensing her distress. "You sure?" Anna hesitated, her internal turmoil evident on her face. Then she forced another smile, trying to mask her fear. "Can I sleep in Ethan's room tonight?" Richard set the papers aside, his attention fully focused on her. "Did something happen?" She bit her lip, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Just nightmares again," she mumbled, hoping he would accept her explanation without further probing. He watched her for a long moment, his gaze searching and perceptive, his instincts telling him something was amiss. Finally, he nodded slowly, respecting her privacy but remaining vigilant. "All right," he said gently, "but if those nightmares ever start writing letters, I want to know." She looked up sharply, startled by his words. "What do you mean?" He stood, walked over to her, and gently reached into the front pocket of her hoodie, his movements deliberate and reassuring. He pulled out the folded note, holding it up for her to see. Anna's eyes widened in surprise and disbelief. "I saw you slip it in when you came in with the mail," he said, his voice calm but firm, his gaze unwavering. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said softly. He could see the apprehension in her eyes. Her voice tightened as she whispered, "I'm sorry." Richard crouched down, making sure their eyes met. "You don't need to apologize," he said gently. "You need to tell me about Reggie Island." She blinked hard, processing his request, and then nodded slowly. She proceeded to tell him everything, laying bare the details of her relationship with Reggie. She explained how Reggie had initially helped her out, and then how he had started threatening her when she tried to stop running errands for him. She even told him how he used to spend hours standing outside her building, watching her. Richard's face remained calm and composed as he listened, but Anna could sense the storm brewing behind his eyes. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" he finally asked, his voice low. "I didn't want you to send me away," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Anna, listen to me," he said, his eyes filled with sincerity. "There is absolutely nothing you can do that will make me send you away. Nothing. You're not a burden, you're not a case, you're part of this family now." A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "Okay," she whispered, finally feeling a sense of relief. The next day, Richard made a call to a private security consultant he had worked with several years prior during a corporate extortion case. The man's name was Marcus Kane. He was ex-military, quiet and precise, everything Richard needed for this job. "As just a small-time hustler," Richard explained during their meeting. "But I want eyes on Anna's old neighborhood, discreetly. We're not starting a war, we're just sending a message." Marcus nodded, understanding the situation perfectly. "Message received," he said. By sunset, Marcus had 2 men discreetly walking the block in the Bronx where Anna used to live. The moment Reggie showed his face near the old building, he was followed, photographed, and quietly warned. "She's not yours anymore," one of the men said, his voice low and menacing. You go near her again, you'll wish you hadn't. Reggie had initially laughed it off, trying to act tough. But when he came home that night and found his apartment door ajar and his favorite shoes gone, replaced by a single sunflower taped to the wall, he finally got the message. Meanwhile, back at the townhouse, Anna slowly began to settle in again. She still habitually checked the windows and flinched whenever she heard footsteps too close behind her, but these reactions were becoming less frequent. Slowly, she started drawing again, her passion reignited. She even began adding a sunflower to the corner of every page, a subtle symbol of hope and new beginnings. At night, she would sit with Richard in the study, reading old books aloud. Sometimes she would ask questions about Ethan's mom, trying to understand the woman she never knew. Other times, she would ask about Richard's childhood, curious about his past. "What was your favorite thing when you were my age?" she asked one night, her eyes filled with genuine curiosity. "Baseball," he said, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. "I used to pretend I'd play for the Yankees until I realized I couldn't hit a curveball to save my life." Anna grinned, imagining a young Richard dreaming of baseball glory. "Do you ever regret not playing?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "I regret not staying close to the people who believed I could." She looked down, her gaze fixed on her hands. "I used to think the only way to stay safe was to be invisible." "Not anymore," Richard said, his voice firm and reassuring. "Now you have people who will stand in front of you, protecting you from harm." Anna glanced at the sunflower she had drawn in the corner of her notebook, a small symbol of her newfound hope. "Yeah," she said softly, "I think maybe I do." But, just as things began to quiet down and a sense of normalcy returned, a story broke that threatened to shatter their fragile peace. A journalist, hungry for an exclusive, had managed to track down fragments of Anna's past. A scandalous headline ran across 3 local papers and a viral blog, "From the Streets to the Penthouse. Who is the girl living with Richard Bennett?" The article included blurred images of her walking to school with Ethan, fueling speculation and gossip. It also featured a quote from a distant neighbor claiming Anna was always getting into trouble, and an anonymous source from CPS questioning the wisdom of letting a billionaire raise a child with a traumatic past. Richard, enraged by the invasion of their privacy, threw the newspaper across the room. "Who gave them this?" he growled, his voice filled with fury. His assistant, visibly pale, stammered, "No one from your team, sir. They must have paid someone off near her old building." Anna didn't cry, but she retreated into herself, refusing to speak for the rest of the day. When Richard gently asked if she was okay, she just whispered, "I thought I was safe." He sat beside her on the porch swing that night, the city lights glowing faintly in the distance. "You are safe," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "They're trying to make me small again," she whispered, her voice laced with pain. He shook his head, his jaw clenched. "No article gets to define you, Anna. No stranger knows what you've survived." She looked at him, her eyes filled with vulnerability. "Will it ever stop?" He sighed, acknowledging the harsh reality of their situation. "No, probably not, but you'll grow louder than their noise. That's the only way to drown it out." And as the wind carried autumn leaves across the yard, Anna leaned into him, not as a guest, not as a rescue, but as something more. Someone finally learning that being seen didn't have to mean being hunted. It could mean being held, protected, and loved. The Monday after the article was published, Anna walked into the school building with her hoodie pulled low and her shoulders tight, bracing herself for the inevitable fallout. She had been enrolled at the prestigious Westbridge Elementary just 2 weeks prior, a place filled with manicured lawns, polished marble floors, and students with last names that adorned donor plaques. But now, every hallway felt like a spotlight, and every whisper felt like it was directed at her. She could feel the shift in atmosphere. At first, the students had been curious and polite, even welcoming. A few had even asked to sit with her at lunch, but after the article, the warmth had vanished like steam on glass, replaced by whispers and stares. "She used to sleep in stairwells," one girl hissed behind her hand, her voice dripping with disdain. "She's not really his daughter. said another, her tone laced with envy. She just got lucky. Anna didn't flinch, not outwardly, but inside, her stomach churned with anxiety. She recognized this language. She knew the tone. It was the same one Reggie used to use when he told her she didn't belong with clean people. By the time lunch rolled around, she found herself sitting alone, isolated from the rest of the students. Ethan arrived late, clutching his tray. "Sorry," he said, plopping down across from her. "I had to talk to Miss Green about my science project." Anna didn't respond, her gaze fixed on her food. He tilted his head, studying her face. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she muttered, avoiding eye contact. Ethan leaned closer, sensing her distress. "Don't listen to them, Anna. They don't know you." Anna traced a crack in the lunch table surface with her finger, her thoughts swirling with doubt. "Maybe they're right," she said softly. "Maybe I don't belong here." He pushed his tray aside, his expression serious. "You know what? I think you make them uncomfortable because you remind them that the world isn't as perfect as their lunchboxes." Anna finally looked up, a faint smile playing on her lips. "That sounded smart," she said, surprised by his insight. "Did you read that somewhere?" "Nope," he said, grinning. "Made it up just now. Pretty good, huh?" he added, puffing out his chest. Anna laughed softly, the sound a welcome break from the tension she had been feeling. Yeah, it was. Meanwhile, Richard sat in a tense boardroom at his foundation's headquarters, facing 6 directors who looked increasingly uncomfortable. The fallout from the article has begun to hit, not just in whispers, but in funding, said Malcolm, a thin man with silver glasses, his voice filled with concern. "Several of our corporate partners have asked for clarity on your situation. They want to know if the foundation is being used as a personal charity." "It's not," Richard said flatly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Public perception is everything," another board member added, his tone cautious. "We've worked hard to establish the foundation as professional and impartial." "I'm not asking for their permission to care about a child," Richard interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "And if they want to pull funding because I chose to protect a girl who saved my son's life, then they were never partners. They were investors. And I'm not selling shares in compassion." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Diane, seated at the far end, smiled faintly, appreciating Richard's unwavering conviction. Richard stood, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Let them walk," he said, his voice firm. "We'll survive without them, but I won't run my life according to public gossip." That evening, Anna remained withdrawn and quiet. She picked at her food, answered questions with one-word replies, and excused herself to bed early, seeking refuge in the solitude of her room. Richard knocked on her door an hour later. "Can I come in?" he asked gently. "Sure," came the muffled reply from inside. He entered and found her lying on her bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her notebook was open beside her, revealing a half-drawn sunflower sketched across the page. "I read the article," she said without looking at him. "I saw the comments online." Richard sat at the foot of the bed, his presence offering silent support. "That was a mistake," he said softly. "Don't read the comments, Anna. They aren't written by people who know you." "But what if they're right?" she asked, finally turning to face him, her eyes filled with vulnerability. "What if I'm just temporary?" "You're not," he said firmly, his voice leaving no room for doubt. Anna sat up, crossing her legs, her expression troubled. "They say you're just doing this to fix your reputation. That I'm your project. Do you feel like a project?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. She shook her head slowly. "I feel like someone trying not to mess it all up." Richard sighed, understanding the immense pressure she was putting on herself. "Anna, every person in this house is trying not to mess it up," he said gently. "Me, Ethan, even the cat. And we don't even own a cat." That earned a small laugh from her, breaking the tension that had been building. He reached for her notebook and flipped through a few pages, his eyes scanning the drawings and sketches. One page caught his attention, a list titled Things I'm Afraid of. Only one item was written so far, going back. He closed the notebook gently, his heart aching for the pain she had endured. "You're not going back, Anna," he said, his voice filled with unwavering resolve. "Not to Reggie. Not to that building. Not to being invisible." Her lip trembled, betraying the fear that still lingered within her. "How do you know?" "Because I'm not letting go," he said, his gaze locking with hers, "no matter how loud they get out there." Later that week, Anna's tutor, Miss Alvarez, introduced a poetry assignment, encouraging her students to find their voice. "Write something true," she told the class. "Something real, not pretty, not polished, just honest." Anna stared at her blank paper for a long time, wrestling with her thoughts and emotions. Then, slowly, she began to write, pouring her heart and soul onto the page. Her poem was titled The Hallway. It spoke of walking down corridors where no one saw her, of sleeping next to broken heaters and waking to the sound of sirens, of finding a boy bleeding on the concrete and choosing to stay even though her legs were screaming at her to run. She didn't read it aloud, too afraid to expose her vulnerability to the judgment of others. But Miss Alvarez, sensing the power and honesty of her words, asked for permission to share it anonymously. The next week, during a school assembly, Miss Alvarez read Anna's poem to the entire student body. Students sat in stunned silence as her voice echoed through the auditorium, painting a vivid picture of Anna's past struggles. When the poem ended, there was a brief hush, followed by a wave of applause that washed over the room. Anna sat in the second row, shrinking at first, overwhelmed by the attention. Then, slowly, she straightened her back, finding strength in the shared experience. Later, as she exited the auditorium, a girl she didn't know tapped her arm. "Hey," the girl said, her eyes filled with empathy. "That was you, wasn't it?" Anna hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I liked it," the girl continued, unabashed. "It made me feel like I wasn't the only one." That night, Anna added a new line to her notebook under Things I'm Afraid of, being seen. Then, in smaller letters underneath, she added, "But maybe it's not always bad." Meanwhile, across the city, Reggie sat alone in a dimly lit bar, scrolling through the same article that had disrupted Anna's life. "Little brat got herself famous," he muttered, his face twisted with resentment. The man beside him grunted in agreement. "Should have known she'd bring trouble. She always had that fire in her." Reggie leaned back, tapping his cigarette against the edge of his glass, his eyes narrowed. "Still got time to put it out." And just like that, the echoes of Anna's past stirred again, growing louder, closer, and ready to knock down the fragile walls she had built around herself. The first sign came on a Wednesday afternoon. Ethan and Anna were walking home from school, or rather, to the office building where Richard had scheduled a late meeting and promised them pizza afterward. Their driver, Mason, had parked a block away due to road work, forcing the two kids to walk the final stretch on their own. They were chatting about the age-old debate of whether or not pineapple belonged on pizza. "I say yes," Ethan insisted, tossing his backpack over one shoulder, his voice filled with conviction. Anna wrinkled her nose in disgust. "You just like controversy," she teased, playfully nudging him. They both laughed until Anna suddenly stopped walking, her eyes fixed on something across the street. A familiar figure leaned against a light pole, his hoodie drawn up, obscuring most of his face. But she knew that slouch, that grin, that cigarette dangling between his fingers. It was Reggie. Her breath caught in her throat, and a wave of fear washed over her. "Anna?" Ethan asked, stepping closer, sensing her distress. "What is it?" "Nothing," she said quickly, pulling her hoodie tighter and lowering her head, trying to make herself invisible. "Let's just go." He followed her without question, his instincts telling him something was wrong, but she could feel Reggie's eyes following her, burning through the traffic and the chilly fall air. She didn't look back, not once, terrified of what she might see. By the time they reached the car, her hands were shaking uncontrollably. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat on her windowsill, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her eyes locked on the distant city lights, seeking a sense of security in the vastness of the urban landscape. Richard knocked softly on the door and entered without waiting for a response, his face etched with concern. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently. She shook her head, unable to articulate the fear that consumed her. "Want to talk?" She shook her head again, her voice trapped in her throat. He came anyway, sitting beside her on the windowsill, his presence offering a silent reassurance. "I used to stay up like this when Ethan was little," he said softly, "especially after his mom passed. Every creak in the house made me think someone was trying to take him from me." She glanced sideways at him, her curiosity piqued. "Did anyone try?" He looked out the window, his gaze distant. "Not physically," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "But the world doesn't always need hands to do harm." Anna hesitated, then whispered, "I saw him." Richard turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "Who?" "Reggie." The name hung in the air like a dropped stone in still water, disrupting the fragile peace of the room. "Where?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "Outside school," she replied, her voice barely audible. "I didn't say anything because I didn't want you to panic." He took a deep breath, trying to contain the anger that threatened to erupt. "I don't panic, Anna. I plan." Anna's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her fear palpable. "Is he going to hurt me?" "No," Richard said firmly, his voice filled with unwavering resolve. "Not while I'm breathing." The next morning, Marcus Kane was already waiting in Richard's office, sipping black coffee and reviewing the details of the situation. "He made himself known, Marcus," Richard said after relaying the update. "That's too bold to be random." Marcus nodded in agreement, his expression serious. "I'll double the security detail. But if you want this done right, we need to make sure he understands there's no loophole, no chance of getting to her. He doesn't just need to disappear, Richard. He needs to understand the consequences of his actions." "I don't want violence," Richard said, his voice firm. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "I never said violence," he replied calmly, "but fear is a language he understands." Later that afternoon, Anna found a crumpled envelope in her locker. There was no name on it, just a scrap of brown paper folded roughly, a stark reminder of her past. She opened it and read the message scrawled in pencil, her heart sinking with each word. "You can play rich all you want, but you and I both know you ain't one of them." She stared at the note for a long time, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. She slowly folded it and slipped it into her math book, trying to compartmentalize the fear and anxiety that threatened to consume her. Then, with a newfound determination, she walked into the main office and asked to speak with the principal. Richard arrived 20 minutes later, his face etched with concern. Anna stood in the principal's office, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable, a mask to hide her inner turmoil. She didn't cry, the principal said, clearly impressed by her composure. She didn't run. She said she wanted to report a safety threat. "I want security cameras checked," Anna added, her voice steady and clear. "If they're real, good. If not, you should fix that." Richard looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something fundamental had shifted within her. She wasn't just scared anymore. She was angry, and angry Anna was a force to be reckoned with. 2 days later, Marcus' team tracked Reggie to a dingy motel on the outskirts of Queens, a place that reeked of desperation and broken dreams. They didn't confront him directly. Not yet. But a black SUV appeared outside his window every night at exactly 10 p.m., its presence a constant reminder that he was being watched. He found his room ransacked one evening, everything tossed around, but nothing stolen. Just rearranged, his shoes swapped, his toothpaste replaced with an identical tube full of salt, a subtle form of psychological warfare designed to erode his confidence. One night, a sunflower was left on his windshield. Its petals burned at the tips, a clear message of warning and retribution. Reggie stopped smiling after that, but he stubbornly refused to leave, clinging to the hope that he could somehow regain control of the situation. Saturday morning, Anna woke to find Richard sitting in the kitchen with a mug of coffee and a manila envelope, his expression serious. "What's that?" she asked, wiping the sleep from her eyes. "Information," he said, pushing the envelope across the table towards her. "About Reggie." Anna sat down across from him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What kind of information?" "He has a record," Richard explained, his voice matter of fact. "Petty crimes, a few assault charges. Nothing big enough to lock him up forever, but enough to make him slippery." "Why does he want me back?" Anna asked, her voice filled with confusion and fear. Richard considered her question, searching for the right words. "Control," he said finally. "Familiarity. Some people can't stand to see someone rise above what they've escaped. It challenges their own choices, their own limitations." Anna exhaled slowly, absorbing his words. "Then let's make sure I stay above it," she said, her voice filled with newfound resolve. He tilted his head, intrigued by her sudden confidence. "How?" "Let's tell the truth," she said, her gaze unwavering. "All of it." Richard blinked, surprised by her suggestion. "You want to go public?" She nodded, her expression serious. "Not to be famous, but to be clear. I'm not hiding anymore." By Monday, Richard's PR team had prepared a statement. Not a press conference, but a carefully recorded video that would allow Anna to tell her story in her own words, without interruption or manipulation. Anna, sitting between Richard and Ethan, told her story plainly and honestly. She spoke of how she grew up, what she saw, what she did to help a stranger, and how people had tried to silence her. "Him not a headline," she said at the end, her voice steady and clear. "Him not a pity case. Him not a problem to be solved. Him a person. And him not going anywhere." The video was posted on the Foundation's social media account at noon. By 3 p.m., it had over 1.4 million views, and the numbers continued to climb exponentially. By evening, the comments poured in, a flood of support and admiration. Teachers praised her bravery. Former foster kids thanked her for speaking out. Survivors of violence said she gave them hope, that her story resonated with their own struggles and inspired them to keep fighting. One comment stood out amidst the sea of supportive messages. It read, "She's more grown than half the adults I know. Protect her at all costs." That night, Reggie watched the video in the same bar he always sat in, surrounded by the familiar faces of his old life. His face twisted with rage and frustration as he watched Anna tell her story, reclaiming her narrative and defying his attempts to control her. "She thinks she's untouchable now," he muttered, his voice laced with venom. The bartender, overhearing his outburst, leaned over and warned him. "Careful, man. That girl's got people watching her." Reggie slammed his drink down on the counter, his eyes blazing with defiance. "So do I." But even as he said it, he knew something had irrevocably changed. Anna wasn't running anymore, and he understood, deep down, that the scariest kind of strength wasn't the kind that yelled and threatened. It was the kind that stood still, unwavering and unyielding. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands, his frustration mounting with each passing moment. The past was slipping from his grasp, and the girl he thought he could control had already walked beyond his reach, leaving him stranded in the shadows. Rain fell heavily that Thursday, painting the windows gray and soaking the streets in a somber silence. Anna sat on the edge of the couch in the living room, her knees pulled up to her chest, seeking comfort in her own embrace. The news cycle had gone quiet for a day, giving her a brief respite from the relentless scrutiny of the media. But inside, her world felt louder than ever, filled with the echoes of her past and the uncertainty of her future. Richard was upstairs on a conference call, immersed in the demands of his business. Ethan was at a playdate, enjoying a rare moment of carefree childhood, and the house felt oddly still without their usual noise, amplifying the silence and allowing her thoughts to run wild. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed, shattering the tranquility of the moment. She jumped, startled by the sudden intrusion. "Anna," Mason's voice crackled through the speaker. "There's a woman at the gate, says she's your grandmother." Her breath caught in her throat, her mind reeling with disbelief. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Richard was downstairs in less than a minute, a towel slung around his neck, his hair still damp from the shower. He had clearly rushed down the stairs, his face etched with concern. "Did he say your grandmother?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Anna nodded slowly, stunned by the unexpected turn of events. "But I haven't seen her in months," she stammered, her thoughts racing. Richard looked at her, then at the intercom, his mind working quickly. "Mason, let her in slowly. Bring her to the front porch. Anna and I will meet her there." Anna's hands trembled as she followed Richard to the entryway, her heart pounding in her chest with a mixture of anticipation and fear. The front door opened just as Mason escorted a frail-looking woman under a large black umbrella, shielding her from the relentless rain. She wore a floral headscarf, a long coat a size too big, and her eyes, though weathered by time and hardship, held a glimmer of warmth and recognition. They were eyes that had seen both struggle and softness, a reflection of a life lived on the margins. "Miss Loretta Green?" Richard asked, his voice polite but cautious. The woman looked up, her gaze meeting his. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice raspy but clear. "That's me." Anna stepped forward slowly, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Grandma?" Loretta's eyes filled with tears as she recognized her granddaughter. "Oh, baby," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Anna hesitated for a moment, then rushed into her grandmother's arms, burying her face in the older woman's embrace. The sob escaped before she could stop it, a release of pent-up emotions that had been building for months. Loretta hugged her tight, rocking her gently, her touch familiar and comforting. "Look at you," she whispered, her voice filled with pride. "You've grown taller and heavier, too. That's a good sign." Richard watched quietly, his hands in his pockets, allowing them their moment of reunion. After several minutes, he cleared his throat, breaking the emotional silence. "Would you like to come in, Miss Green?" he asked, his voice warm and inviting. "He'll make some tea." They sat at the kitchen table, the rain softening outside, creating a cozy and intimate atmosphere within the warm confines of the house. Loretta cupped the warm mug with both hands, her fingers trembling slightly, a testament to her age and the hardships she had endured. "I had pneumonia," she explained, her voice weak but steady. "Knocked me out for almost a month. When I came to, the shelter said Anna was gone. I thought she ran away. I didn't know," her voice cracked with emotion. "I didn't know someone had taken her in. She didn't run," Richard said gently, his voice filled with compassion. "She saved my son's life. That's how we met." Loretta turned to Anna, her eyes filled with love and concern. "Is it true, baby?" Anna nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "He was hurt. I couldn't just leave him." Tears filled Loretta's eyes, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "That's your mama's heart, baby," she said softly. She was like that, too, always helping others, no matter the cost. They sat in a silence filled with more meaning than words could hold, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that connected them and the shared history that had shaped their lives. Then Richard cleared his throat again, breaking the silence. "Miss Green, I know this isn't easy, but I need to ask, what are your intentions?" Loretta looked up, startled by the directness of his question. "You mean, do I want her back?" "Yes," Richard said, his gaze unwavering. The old woman exhaled slowly, her shoulders slumping with a mixture of exhaustion and resignation. "I want her safe," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "That's all I ever wanted, but Lord knows I ain't got much to offer her right now. Him staying at a halfway house, trying to get back on my feet. I got a job at a laundromat starting next week, but—" She looked at Anna, her eyes filled with love and a deep sense of sacrifice. "She's better off here, with you. At least for now." Anna reached across the table and held her grandmother's hand, her touch offering comfort and support. "Can we see each other sometimes, if hell allow it?" she asked softly, her eyes pleading. "I will allow it," Richard answered immediately, his voice sincere. "As long as the court agrees." Loretta smiled faintly, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Richard nodded, returning her smile. "You can call me Richard," he said, his voice warm and friendly. That night, Anna couldn't sleep again, but for a different reason. This time, her thoughts didn't spiral with fear or dread, but with something gentler, something more hopeful. The unexpected reappearance of her grandmother had stirred something deep within her, a sense of connection to her past and a glimmer of hope for the future. Richard sat beside her on the stairs, sharing a bowl of popcorn Ethan had forgotten in the microwave, his presence offering silent companionship. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked suddenly, her voice filled with doubt. "About what?" Richard asked, turning to face her. "Not going back," she clarified. "Staying here, with you." Richard looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding and affection. "You didn't run away from something, Anna," he said gently. "You ran towards something. That's different. That's brave." She smiled slightly, his words offering a sense of reassurance. "I just didn't want her to think I forgot her," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She knows you didn't," Richard said, his voice filled with conviction. "You reminded her just by being the person she raised you to be, kind, compassionate, and resilient." Anna leaned against the wall, her thoughts swirling with a mixture of emotions. "I think maybe," she said softly. "I have 2 families now," Richard chuckled, the sound warm and comforting. "That's twice the chores," he teased, trying to lighten the mood. She rolled her eyes playfully, a smile gracing her lips. "You're not funny." 2 days later, Richard sat in court again, this time with Loretta beside him, a united front against the challenges they faced. The judge reviewed the updated case files, now including Loretta's reappearance, her medical reports, and the statement she had given, expressing her support for Anna staying with Richard until her situation stabilized. "This is a rare circumstance," Judge Cook said, glancing between Richard and Loretta, her expression thoughtful. "But I see no animosity here, only care and concern for the well-being of the child." Loretta nodded, her voice filled with conviction. "As doing right by her," she said. "That's more than most can say." Judge Cook smiled, acknowledging the genuine affection and cooperation that existed between them. "Then, we'll extend temporary guardianship for another 90 days, she announced, her voice authoritative. "He'll expect updates every month, including reports from both parties, detailing Anna's progress and well-being." Anna squeezed Loretta's hand, her heart filled with gratitude and hope, and for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something to survive, but something to build, something to look forward to with anticipation and excitement. But even as things stabilized and a sense of normalcy returned, trouble was brewing elsewhere, lurking in the shadows and threatening to disrupt their fragile peace. In a dingy corner of Reggie's favorite bar, he sat nursing a black eye, his face a mask of bitterness and resentment. Word had gotten out that he had been poking around the Bennett estate, asking questions and making threats. Some people didn't like that. People with money and power. People who weren't afraid to act without leaving fingerprints. People who were determined to protect Anna at all costs. He was bitter, but not stupid, which was why he had started collecting things, gathering information that he hoped could be used to his advantage. He had photos, emails, even a tip about a past mistake Richard had once made during a real estate deal, a mistake that could raise eyebrows and cast a shadow on his seemingly impeccable reputation. It wasn't anything major, nothing that could send him to jail, but just enough to stir the pot and cause trouble. And now he had a name, a blogger, a woman known for spinning small stories into viral takedowns, a woman with a reputation for being ruthless and sensationalistic. He lit a cigarette and pulled out his burner phone, his eyes narrowed with determination. It was time to stir the pot and unleash a new wave of chaos. If he couldn't touch the girl directly, he would bring everything crashing down around her, destroying the life she had built and leaving her with nothing. And, this time, he wouldn't miss. The following Monday began like any other, a seemingly ordinary start to a new week. Ethan and Anna walked to the car under the crisp morning sky, their backpacks thumping lightly with each step, their voices filled with youthful energy and enthusiasm. Richard sipped his black coffee by the front window, already dressed in his tailored gray suit, his phone pressed between his shoulder and ear as he navigated the day's meetings, his mind focused on the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. But at 9:17 a.m., everything changed in an instant. An alert popped onto his phone, a headline that sent a chill down his spine. Breaking. Billionaire philanthropist under fire for allegedly buying custody of homeless girl. The article came from a fringe but growing online outlet called The Mirror Post, a website known for its conspiracy-laced exposés and its sensationalistic approach to social media. It was run by a woman named Trina Malaloy, a blogger with a taste for scandal and a deep-seated disdain for nuance and accuracy. Richard clicked the link, his heart pounding in his chest. The headline was loud and accusatory, the tone sharp and cynical. The opening paragraph spun a familiar narrative, twisting the truth to fit a predetermined agenda. White billionaire takes in poor black girl with tragic past. Is it charity or control? Is Richard Bennett a savior or a manipulator? Worse, the article included anonymous quotes, bitter and vindictive, from someone who knew details they shouldn't, someone who had access to information that should have remained confidential. She's just a pawn in his PR machine. One source even claimed he's hiding something. He was always isolating himself. Then came the real blow. A blurry photo of Anna standing in front of Westbridge Elementary, holding Ethan's hand. Underneath it, a caption read, "A child caught in a story she doesn't understand." Richard's coffee mug slammed against the marble counter, cracking loudly. By 9:30 a.m., his assistant, Nain, had called an emergency meeting. His legal team, PR consultants, and foundation board members sat stiffly around the long oak table. "We're getting hammered on social media," Nain reported. "The story's trending on X. People are calling it number billionaire baby snatcher and all sorts of things." Richard ran a hand over his face, his weariness evident. "What's our move?" Silence hung in the air until Carla, the head of PR, spoke. "Silence won't work, but aggression won't either. We need transparency." A statement that doesn't read as defensive. "Should we file a defamation lawsuit?" one of the lawyers asked. "Not yet," Richard said, his voice low but firm. "We don't throw gasoline on a fire we haven't measured." Meanwhile, Anna sat in her classroom, initially oblivious to the online storm. It wasn't until recess that a classmate approached her with a hesitant question. "Hey," the girl whispered. "Why are you in the news again?" Anna blinked, confused. "What?" "People are saying you're not really part of Mr. Bennett's family, that he just took you in to look good." Anna's stomach dropped. She turned and saw 3 other kids huddled around a phone, reading something, whispering, and glancing at her. The world seemed to tilt. Her ears rang. By the time Ethan found her, Anna was in the nurse's office, sitting quietly with her hoodie pulled low, her fingers clenched tightly in her jeans. "They're saying stuff again," she said, without looking at him. "I know," he said softly. "Dad saw it. Has fixing it." Anna finally looked up, her eyes filled with doubt. "Can he fix everything?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he sat beside her, their shoulders touching, offering silent support. At home that evening, Richard sat with Anna at the kitchen island. A laptop was open between them, displaying a draft of the Foundation's official response. Anna read it slowly, her expression thoughtful. "It's good, but it's not mine." Richard raised an eyebrow, questioning. "What do you mean?" I want to say something too." In my voice. He hesitated, concerned about the impact on her. "You sure? It's a lot of pressure, a lot of noise." She nodded, her resolve firm. "They keep trying to talk over me. Let me speak." He exhaled, then a small smile played on his lips. "All right, you write it. I'll back you." Hannah's letter went live the next morning. It wasn't long, just 5 paragraphs. It told her story simply and plainly, how she had lived, what she had seen, how she had chosen to stay and help Ethan. She wrote about how Richard had never once made her feel like anything but a person with a voice, with choices, with dignity. She ended with, "You can question his motives, but don't question my worth. I know who I am, and I chose to be here." Within hours, the tide began to shift. Not completely, as some still clung to their outrage like armor. But others, teachers, advocates, and foster parents, shared the letter, praised her courage, and pointed out how dangerous it was to strip a child of agency under the guise of truth. Trina Malloy doubled down, releasing a follow-up post filled with speculation about Richard's past business dealings, including a vague reference to an old zoning dispute in Harlem, claiming he displaced low-income families for luxury condos. "It's a smear job," Nyan said, and clearly timed. Richard nodded. "But this time, we respond with facts." They pulled records, interviewed residents, and released a clear breakdown of the Harlem project, revealing that not only had Richard not forced anyone out, but that he had funded over 70% of the affordable housing preserved in the process. Trina tried to pivot, but the narrative began slipping from her grip. That weekend, Loretta came to visit. She brought homemade sweet potato pie wrapped in foil and a stack of old photos. Anna's mom at 14, Anna as a toddler in a plastic kiddie pool. "You know," Loretta said, watching Anna place one photo into a silver frame, "I was scared when you stayed with him. Thought maybe you'd forget where you came from." Anna looked up, her eyes filled with warmth. "I didn't forget. I just added more to who I am." Loretta smiled, her face radiating pride. "Well, baby, who you are is something fierce." Richard entered the room then, holding 2 mugs of hot cider. "We got word from Judge Cook," he said. "She's requesting an early hearing. Says she's seen enough progress to discuss permanent guardianship." Anna's heart stopped, a mix of excitement and trepidation flooding through her. "Permanent?" Loretta nodded slowly, her expression encouraging. "You ready for that?" Anna took a deep breath, centering herself. "Yeah, I think I am." But just as peace settled again, a phone rang. Richard answered, his eyes narrowing as he listened. He turned away from the room, his jaw tightening. "What is it?" Anna asked when he returned, her voice laced with concern. Richard glanced at her, then at Loretta, then sighed, the weight of the news heavy on his shoulders. "That blogger," he said, "she's not done. Someone gave her a sealed juvenile report. She's threatening to publish a piece about your mother, about the night she died." Anna froze, her face paling. "She says if we don't stop weaponizing sympathy, she'll tell the world your mom was arrested the same year you were born, that she had addiction issues, that she lost custody once before." Richard knelt beside her, his voice gentle but firm. "None of that defines her or you, but you need to know this is what she's trying to use." Anna's voice was a whisper, barely audible. "Can she do that?" "It's illegal," Richard said, "but she's counting on the damage being done before we can stop it." Loretta shook her head, a deep sadness in her eyes. "They always go after the mother." Anna stood slowly, her hands trembling, but her voice was clear and resolute. "Let her try." Richard looked at her, surprised by her sudden defiance. "Are you sure?" Anna nodded, her gaze unwavering. "If she wants to write the story, fine. But this time, we tell it first, the truth. All of it." She looked Richard square in the eyes, her determination shining through. "If people are going to talk about my mom, they're going to know her heart, not just her mistakes." And, just like that, the next battle wasn't about survival, it was about legacy. Richard sat in his study late into the night, phone to his ear, fingers drumming the edge of a legal folder. "I understand, yes, but we need to move fast. If Trina Malloy goes live with that story, the damage will be near irreversible, even if it's illegal." He paused, listening intently. "We have the truth, but the truth needs air. not silence. He ended the call and exhaled sharply, glancing at the photo on his desk. Anna and Ethan, arms around each other, both smiling, pure and unscripted. The next morning, the plan was already in motion. Anna sat in front of the camera in a soft blue sweater. Loretta to her left, Richard to her right. Behind them was a simple bookshelf filled with real books, not props. Books her mother once read aloud, poems that Loretta used to recite over bowls of cornbread and beans. The camera light blinked red, signaling it was time to begin. "My name is Anna Green," she began. "I'm 12 years old. I've lived in places most people would call broken, but my story didn't start with tragedy. It started with a woman named Camila." Loretta reached for her hand, squeezing gently, offering her strength and support. "She was my mother," Anna continued. "People may write headlines about the worst things she went through, but I remember the best things she gave me, like how she used to hum while brushing my hair, or how she held me so tight the night our building lost heat and said, 'Cold don't stand a chance when love is near.'" Richard blinked, looking down, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Anna's voice didn't shake. "My mom struggled. She had addiction in her past, yes, but she also had dreams. She wanted to get clean. She fought for me, even when the world told her she wouldn't win. She lost once, but she got me back. She was getting better until she wasn't. Until one man decided her life didn't matter." She paused, her voice filled with a quiet strength. That man was Reggie. Loretta's gasp was soft, but it echoed in the room. "I never told the full story before," Anna said. "Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't ready to carry her pain and mine at the same time. Now I am." They uploaded the video less than an hour later. Within minutes, the views surged. By noon, national reporters were picking it up. "She flipped the narrative," Nan said, pacing the foundation office, her voice filled with admiration. "She didn't just defend her mother, she honored her." Richard nodded, his expression reflecting a mix of pride and relief. Back in her room, Anna scrolled through the comments. Some were hateful, some ignorant, but most were full of love and support. "Thank you for naming your mother. That takes courage. My mom was an addict, too, but she loved us. You reminded me of that. The Camila Green. I won't forget that name." Anna didn't smile, but something in her shoulders relaxed. A knot that had been there for years began to loosen. Across the city, Reggie watched the video on his cracked phone screen. His expression was unreadable, his jaw tight, a cigarette trembling in his fingers. "Little witch," he muttered, his voice laced with venom. His drinking buddy grunted, a mixture of fear and resignation in his eyes. "She's winning, man. Public's on her side." Reggie slammed his glass down, the sound echoing in the dimly lit room. Not for long, but even as he spoke, doubt seeped in. He had underestimated her, her fire, her voice, her refusal to break. And now she had a platform, one he couldn't silence. Yet he wasn't finished. He picked up the burner phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Yeah? It's time," Reggie said, his voice low and menacing. "I want eyes on her. The house, the school, everywhere. You paying double? You'll get what you want. Then consider it done." Reggie ended the call and looked back at the video. He paused it on Anna's face, his eyes fixated on hers. Those eyes, so much like Camila's, a chill ran down his spine. The past wasn't just haunting him, it was chasing him. The next day, Richard received a call from Judge Cook's clerk. "She's requested the final hearing be moved up," the clerk said, her voice laced with urgency. "There's pressure from both sides, and she'd like to address it before it becomes a circus." "When?" 3 days from now." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his thoughts and preparing for the inevitable storm. Well, be there. He didn't tell Anna that night. Not yet. Instead, he watched her from the doorway as she painted at the kitchen table, her brush dancing through hues of violet and gold. "Is that a sunset?" he asked, his voice soft and filled with admiration. No, she replied, her eyes sparkling with creativity. It's a sunrise. There's a difference. He nodded, walking over to get a closer look at her artwork. Can I ask why? Because one means something is ending, she said. But this means something is starting. The morning of the hearing, Anna dressed carefully, not in anything fancy, just a navy blue dress and the silver necklace her mother once gave her, the one Loretta had kept wrapped in cloth all these years. It was slightly tarnished, but warm against her skin, a tangible reminder of her past and her mother's love. Loretta met them at the courthouse steps, her presence a source of strength and comfort. Ethan stayed home with Marcus, just in case. Anna didn't ask why, but she knew. Security was tighter than usual. Reporters loitered outside, their presence adding to the already tense atmosphere. A few tried to shout questions as Anna walked by, their voices intrusive and relentless. Anna, is this your final word? Are you afraid of being returned to foster care? She didn't answer. She just walked, her head held high, her gaze fixed on the entrance to the courthouse. Inside, the courtroom was quiet and serious, the air thick with anticipation. Judge Cook looked older today, perhaps weighed down by the media noise or by the stakes that now surrounded this young girl's life. Let's proceed, she said, her voice calm and authoritative. Richard's attorney presented first, a calm and thorough review of Anna's well-being, her academic progress, and her mental health. He painted a picture of a young girl thriving in a stable and loving environment. Then came Loretta's testimony, full of grace, acknowledging her limits, her love, and her wish for Anna to thrive. Her words were heartfelt and genuine, reflecting her deep affection for Anna and her unwavering support. Finally, Anna stood, her presence commanding attention. Judge Cook addressed her gently, her voice filled with compassion. Miss Green, you understand that your voice matters here? Yes, Your Honor. Then, I'd like to hear it. Anna didn't read from a paper. She didn't recite a speech. She simply spoke from the heart, her words honest and raw. I'm not perfect, and I've seen things I wish I hadn't. But I also know what home feels like. It's not about money or houses or being in the news. She looked at Richard, her eyes filled with gratitude and affection. It's about being seen. It's about not having to sleep with your shoes on in case someone kicks you out. It's about someone remembering how you take your tea or asking how your day was, even if the day wasn't good. Then she turned back to the judge, her voice filled with a newfound confidence. I've had a lot of people tell me who I am. I think it's time I get to decide that myself. Judge Cook smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding and warmth. And who do you say you are? I'm Anna Camilla Green. And this is where I belong. The courtroom was still, every breath held in anticipation. Then the judge nodded, her expression resolute. I believe that too. And with one stroke of her pen, everything changed. The ruling had barely sunk in when the first threat arrived. It wasn't a bombshell, not the kind that made headlines. No, it came quietly, slid beneath the front gate of the Bennett estate inside a plain white envelope. No return address, no name. Inside, just one sentence typed in a bold courier font. You think paper changes blood? Richard read it once, twice, then folded it and placed it inside his jacket pocket, his face betraying no emotion. When Anna came downstairs for breakfast, he didn't mention it. Not yet. She was still glowing from the judge's final decision, her steps lighter, her eyes wide open in a way they hadn't been since that first night. He found her shivering next to Ethan, but Richard knew shadows didn't disappear just because a judge said the sun had risen. The following week was filled with motion. Legal confirmations, changes to school records, updates to health insurance. Richard's team moved efficiently, ticking boxes, filing documents, ensuring that Anna's place in the family was not only emotional but airtight under the law. One evening, as he signed yet another form, Anna leaned on the doorframe to his study, her expression curious. Do all kids come with this much paperwork? She asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Richard chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Only the ones worth everything. She smiled, her face lighting up with joy. Good answer. But beneath her grin, he noticed the way she fidgeted with her bracelet, the one Loretta had given her, woven from thread and tiny silver beads. It was her nervous tell, a subtle sign that something was off. He closed the file, his full attention now focused on her. Talk to me. Anna hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for the right words. Have you ever forgiven someone who didn't say sorry? Richard leaned back, considering her question, his mind racing with possibilities. Yes, but it wasn't for them. It was for me. Carrying anger is like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick. Anna nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. What if the person's still around, still watching? Richard's hand twitched toward the envelope in his pocket, still unopened and hidden from her view. But he didn't pull it out. Not yet. Is Reggie still trying to contact you? She shook her head, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. Not directly, but sometimes I just feel it, like when the wind changes and you know a storm's coming. Richard stood and walked toward her, resting a hand on her shoulder, his touch offering reassurance and support. If a storm's coming, you won't face it alone. That night, Loretta called, her voice tight and controlled, but behind it was a palpable fear. I think someone's been watching my building, she said, her voice barely a whisper. 2 nights now. I've seen the same man in a black hoodie standing across the street. Doesn't smoke, doesn't talk, just stands. Did you report it? Richard asked, his voice sharp with concern. They said unless he breaks in, there's nothing they can do. Pack a bag, Richard said, his voice firm and decisive. You're coming here for a while. Anna didn't protest when she heard the news, but her face tightened, and her appetite vanished. The threat against Loretta felt personal, a direct assault on their fragile peace. Later that night, she sat on the back patio, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights blink in the distance. Her expression somber. Ethan joined her, 2 mugs of cocoa in hand, his presence a comforting constant in her life. You think it'll ever be normal? She asked, her voice filled with a longing for a life free from fear and uncertainty. Ethan shrugged, his response honest and without pretense. What's normal? I don't know. Going to school without someone whispering about you, sleeping without checking the locks twice. Ethan handed her a mug, his eyes filled with empathy and understanding. Dad says normal is overrated. He says real peace is knowing you can get through the not normal stuff. Anna stared into her cocoa, her expression unreadable. I want to believe that. Then believe it. You've already been through worse. She smiled faintly, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Thanks, nerd. But peace, as always, was short-lived. 3 nights later, Marcus Kane called, his voice lower than usual, his tone grave. We picked up chatter. Reggie's planning something. We don't have all the pieces, but it's bigger than a smear campaign. Richard's jaw clenched, his body tensing with renewed determination to protect Anna. Hez targeting Anna. Maybe you, maybe both. All I know is he's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. What's your recommendation? Increase security. Limit public appearances. And, Marcus paused, his hesitation adding to the sense of dread. Have a conversation with Anna. She needs to know that being brave doesn't mean being exposed. Understood. The conversation happened the next morning after Anna came down from her room, her hoodie pulled tight, headphones around her neck, her posture suggesting a desire to shut out the world. Richard met her at the kitchen counter, his expression gentle but firm. Can we talk? He asked softly. Anna tilted her head, her eyes questioning. About Reggie? Yes. She took a breath, then nodded, her willingness to face the truth a testament to her growing maturity. I've been waiting. They sat, just the 2 of them. Loretta and Ethan were out grocery shopping, ensuring some semblance of normalcy in their lives. The house was quiet, the silence amplifying the weight of the conversation to come. Hez escalating, Richard said, his voice filled with concern. And that means we need to be smart. Anna folded her hands, her expression serious. Do you think he's going to hurt me? I don't know, but I know he's angry, and I know he's reckless. I'm not scared of him, I know, Richard said. But I also know that sometimes bravery looks like stepping back, not stepping up. Anna looked at him, her eyes searching for understanding. You want me to hide. I want you to be safe. She stared at the marble countertop for a long moment, her mind grappling with the implications of his request. Then, okay, Richard blinked, surprised by her immediate acquiescence. Okay, he'll step back. Not because I'm afraid, but because I want to be here. I want to be alive and free, and I can't do that if I'm always looking over my shoulder. He exhaled slowly, a quiet wave of pride washing over him. You're growing up fast. I had to, she said, her voice filled with a quiet resolve. But I don't have to do it alone anymore. The new routine began that afternoon. No more solo walks to school. A security detail followed discreetly in an unmarked car. Her teachers were briefed, ensuring they were aware of the potential threat. Her classroom seat was moved to face the door, providing her with a clear view of anyone entering the room. It was invisible protection, but it was there, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the edges of their lives. Anna didn't like it, but she accepted it, understanding that it was a necessary measure to ensure her safety. And then came the invitation, a chance to reclaim their narrative and show the world the truth. A national morning show wanted her and Richard to appear together to talk about the adoption, the foundation, and the video she made. The invitation was framed as a celebration, a heartwarming story of resilience and hope. But Richard knew better. Publicity was both sword and shield, capable of protecting and defending, but also of cutting and exposing vulnerabilities. He let Anna decide, trusting her instincts and her judgment. I want to go, she said after thinking it through, her expression resolute. But only if we do it my way. What's your way? No makeup team, no fancy dresses, just us. Real. Richard smiled, his heart swelling with pride and admiration. Then that's what we'll do. They sat together on set 2 days later, surrounded by lights, cameras, and nervous producers buzzing around like bees in a hive. The host was kind, her eyes warm and engaging, her voice practiced and soothing. So Anna, she said, her smile genuine, what do you want people to remember most about your journey? Anna didn't hesitate, her voice clear and strong. That I'm not a story someone else wrote. I'm writing it now, and I want other kids to know they can too. The host smiled, her eyes filled with admiration. Beautifully said, but in the control room, someone else was watching, his presence a dark shadow in the otherwise brightly lit space. Reggie. He leaned close to the screen, his eyes twitching with rage, his face contorted with hatred. You think you're untouchable now? He muttered, his voice laced with venom. But even as he said it, his hands shook, betraying his fear and his desperation. Anna had taken everything he tried to use against her and turned it into armor, rendering him powerless to hurt her with words alone. If he wanted to break her now, it would take more than words. Rain drummed softly against the windows of the Bennett estate that evening, a steady rhythm that filled the silence like a lullaby, trying to calm a world that refused to settle. Anna sat on the floor of the living room with Ethan, both surrounded by colored pencils and scraps of paper. They were designing superhero logos for a class project, though only one of them took it seriously. My guy's name is Captain Chill, Ethan said proudly, holding up a sketch of a stick figure with sunglasses and a popsicle. He defeats villains by freezing their bad moods. Anna chuckled, her eyes sparkling with amusement. He looks like a crossing guard on vacation. Exactly, that's his disguise. Richard watched from the hallway, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. In moments like this, the world outside didn't exist. No media, no Reggie, no weight of the past pressing against their peace. Just crayons and laughter, a brief respite from the storm that threatened to engulf them. But peace never lingered long. Marcus arrived just past 9, his coat soaked and face drawn with tension, his presence a stark reminder of the danger that loomed. Richard met him in the library, away from the kids' ears, ensuring they wouldn't be exposed to the harsh realities of the situation. Marcus placed a thin file on the table, its contents a chilling confirmation of their worst fears. Inside were grainy photos, one of Reggie meeting with a man whose face was vaguely familiar, a figure from the darker corners of the city. "Who's that?" Richard asked, his voice low and cautious. "Names: Dennis Voss, known associate of an old street crew in the South Bronx. Word is he owes Reggie money, and Reggie offered him a job instead." "What kind of job?" "Tracking Anna. Maybe more. We intercepted a message Voss sent through an encrypted burner. It mentions retrieving leverage." Richard's jaw tightened, his blood running cold as he understood the full extent of Reggie's plan. "Kidnapping." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "Who were stepping it up? Extra guards, off-duty cops, fully vetted. No more playing defense." Richard stared at the photos, his mind racing, his determination hardening. He slowly closed the folder, his eyes filled with a steely resolve. This ends one way or another. The next morning, Anna was unusually quiet during breakfast, her silence a stark contrast to her usual bubbly personality. She pushed her cereal around in slow circles, her eyes fixed on something far away, her thoughts seemingly lost in another world. "You okay?" Richard asked gently, his voice filled with concern. She nodded, then shook her head, her conflicting responses betraying the turmoil within. "I had a dream. I was back in the alley where I found Ethan, but this time no one came." Richard leaned in, offering her his full attention. "But that didn't happen." "I know, but it felt like something's coming. Like I have to go back there, not the alley, but something like it." Richard hesitated, weighing his options, unsure how to respond to her premonition. Dreams can be echoes or warnings. Anna met his eyes, her gaze piercing and filled with a newfound wisdom. Or both. He realized then that she wasn't just growing up, she was tuning into a part of herself that had learned to read danger in the wind, to sense the approaching storm long before it arrived. That afternoon, Richard called an emergency meeting in the Foundation's secure boardroom, a gathering of their closest allies, to address the escalating threat. Nayan, Marcus, Carla, and Loretta sat around the table, their faces etched with concern. "We need to control this before it explodes," Richard said, his voice firm and resolute. "Malaloy's quiet now, but someone's feeding her. Voss is circling. Reggie's desperate. This isn't just about protecting Anna anymore. It's about stopping the pattern." Carla tapped her tablet, her expression thoughtful. "We could go public again this time. Expose the pressure Anna's under, frame it as a broader issue. How kids from hard backgrounds are still hunted even after being rescued." Loretta looked up, her eyes narrowed, her protective instincts kicking in. "But that puts her back in the crosshairs." "No," Marcus said, his voice decisive. "It turns the spotlight on the predators instead. It forces them out of the shadows." Richard nodded, his mind made up. "Then we use it, but on our terms." 2 days later, the Foundation held a private event, technically a youth empowerment panel, but with a quiet undercurrent of revelation, a carefully orchestrated attempt to expose the forces working against them. Anna sat on stage beside Richard and 3 other teens from vulnerable backgrounds, each telling their story of resilience and hope. When it was Anna's turn, she stood, her presence commanding attention. "I'm not a symbol," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I'm not someone's redemption story. I'm not anyone's headline. I'm a kid who saw things, survived them, and is still figuring out how to be okay with that." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the room, connecting with each and every person in attendance. "But what I won't do is pretend the danger ends just because the adoption papers are signed." Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward, sensing the shift in the narrative, the unveiling of the truth. "There are people who want to hurt kids like me. Not because we did anything wrong, but because we remind them of the truth that we exist, that we speak, that we remember." She looked straight at one of the cameras, her voice steady. "If you're watching this and you're one of them, know this: you're not invisible anymore. Neither are we." That night, the video went viral. But so did something else. an anonymous tip landed in the inbox of a local journalist who had quietly followed Anna's story since the beginning. Attached were photos, audio files, documents linking Reggie to a string of extortion attempts over the past 5 years, including one against a single mother who vanished under mysterious circumstances. The reporter hesitated only long enough to verify them, then published the story at midnight. By dawn, Reggie's face was plastered across every news channel in the city, and by noon he was in custody. Anna sat on the couch, knees tucked beneath her, watching the news unfold. The headline scrolled slowly across the bottom of the screen. Key figure in adoption harassment case arrested on federal charges. She didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "It's done." Richard sat beside her. Not all of it, but a piece of it. She leaned into his side. That's enough for today. Later that week, the police uncovered a stash of burner phones, payment records, and a notebook Reggie had kept sloppy, scrolled, but full of threats. Some targeted Richard, others were aimed at Malaloy, whom he turned on after she refused to publish one of his later stories. Reggie had no loyalty, just hunger. When Anna saw the notebook, she didn't ask to read it. She handed it to Marcus and said simply, "Burn it." Oh. Spring crept into the city with longer days and lighter coats. For the first time in months, Anna walked to school without the unmarked car following close behind. She still checked her surroundings. She still carried a small keychain alarm, but the fear didn't ride her shoulders like it used to. One afternoon after class, she sat by herself on the bleachers, scribbling in her notebook. A girl from science class approached. "Hey," the girl said, "I saw your video. You're brave." Anna looked up. "I'm trying." The girl hesitated. "If you ever want to hang out, we have a book club at the library. It's small but nice." Anna smiled. "Maybe." The girl smiled back, then left. And just like that, a door opened, not with a bang, but a whisper. That night, as Richard closed the final report from Marcus, he looked out the window at the soft orange hue of dusk washing over the city. Anna joined him, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "You okay?" she asked. He took the cup, nodded. "Better than okay." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Anna said, "You know what I'm scared of now?" "What?" "That I won't know how to live without the fight?" Richard looked at her, then gently replied, "Then we learn how to live in peace together. One day at a time." She nodded slowly. "Okay, but if peace gets boring, well, find a way to make it interesting." Anna laughed, her voice clear, untangled for the first time in what felt like forever. And in that moment, peace didn't seem so distant after all. A month passed. Spring matured into a soft bloom across the city. The tulips Richard planted in the front garden, ones Anna helped pick out at the corner nursery, had begun to open, their petals wide, fearless. For the first time in a long time, the Bennett house felt still. Not like a place bracing for something, but a place exhaling. Yet silence, no matter how comforting, always held echoes. And some echoes didn't fade. They waited. One Saturday morning, as Anna rummaged through the attic for old craft supplies, she found a box labeled Camilla, her mother's name, scrolled in Loretta's careful script. She sat cross-legged in the dusty light filtering through the small, round attic window, the box between her knees. Inside were letters, dozens of them, some opened, others still sealed. They were addressed to no one, just pages and pages of ink, her mother's voice trapped in time. "Dear baby," one began, "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but today you turned 3. You smiled at me like I was still worth loving, and I broke all over again." Anna read until her eyes stung. Each letter was a quiet reckoning. Her mother didn't just leave pain behind. She left ragged, imperfect, but real. That night, Anna brought the box downstairs. She placed it on the kitchen island where Richard was finishing the last line of a speech for an upcoming fundraiser. "She wrote these for me," Anna said softly. "But I think she was writing them for herself, too." Richard looked up. "Can I read them?" Anna nodded. "Just not tonight." He respected that. Some healing needed the hush of midnight, not the weight of company. A few days later, Ethan came home from school quieter than usual. He slumped onto the couch, backpack forgotten at the door. Anna sat beside him, pulling her knees to her chest. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, kind of. Want to talk about it?" Ethan hesitated. "Some kids at lunch. They were talking about you again, saying your dad only adopted you because it made him look good. That it was a big publicity stunt." Anna didn't flinch. "Not anymore. And what did you say?" "I told them they didn't know anything, that you saved my life, that I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for you." Anna smiled faintly. "You're a good brother." He looked at her. "You're the best one I've got." Richard decided to take them both on a weekend retreat upstate. A quiet cabin, no phones, no cameras, just fresh air and time. Loretta joined too, baking cornbread in a cast-iron pan and telling stories about summers from her Mississippi youth. One evening, while the boys played cards inside, Loretta and Anna sat on the porch swing under a sky brushed with stars. "Your mama," Loretta began. "She was the strongest weak person I ever knew. And I mean that with love. She had fire in her, but it burned her too." Anna was quiet. Loretta continued. "When she found out she was pregnant, she told me she was terrified, not of being a mom, but of not being enough." "She was enough," Anna whispered. "She was," Loretta said. "She just never believed it. But you carry her better parts. You carry her fight, but you also carry your own peace. That's what she never found." Anna leaned her head on Loretta's shoulder. "Sometimes I hear her in my dreams, just humming, no words." "That's memory," Loretta said. "That's love echoing back." The next week, Richard stood before a crowd of donors and community leaders at the West Bridge Foundation's annual gala. The speech was short, heartfelt, but what stayed with the audience wasn't what he said. It was what Anna said. She stood up midway through dinner, walked to the podium without invitation or prompt. "My name is Anna Green," she began, steady as stone. "Some of you know me, some of you know about me. There's a difference." A hush settled over the room. "I've been the headline. I've been the girl with the past. But I'm more than what happened to me. I'm more than what people did or didn't do." She glanced at Richard, who nodded slowly. "I'm a sister, a daughter, a survivor, and I'm building something new inside myself and around me." She paused. "If you came here tonight to write a check, thank you. But if you came here thinking you're saving someone, think again. We don't need saviors. We need people who stay. People who don't run when the story gets hard." And with that, she stepped down. The applause rose not like thunder, but like a standing ovation at a symphony's final note, earned, resonant, lasting. That night, after they returned home, Richard tucked Ethan in and walked into Anna's room. She was seated at her desk, one of her mother's letters in hand. Anna murmured that the hardest part of love was letting yourself believe it was real. Richard walked over. "And do you?" Anna looked up at him. "Yeah, I do." He knelt beside her. She placed the letter back into the box, then looked out the window. "It's almost summer," she said. "Feels like everything's blooming." "It is," Richard said. Anna smiled. Then quietly, she added, "You know what I want to do next?" "What?" "Help someone else. Not as a project. Just be what I needed." Richard's eyes welled slightly. "Then that's what you'll do?" In that moment, there was no past pressing in, no headlines whispering judgment, just the sound of a girl choosing who she would become, and a man who would stand beside her for every step. And outside, beneath a sky that no longer threatened rain, the tulips bloomed brighter. Anna stood at the entrance of Hollow Creek Youth Center, her heart steady but expectant. The sun filtered through scattered clouds, casting soft shadows on the sidewalk. She adjusted the strap of her backpack and looked over at Richard, who stood beside her with his sleeves rolled and a soft grin playing at the corners of his mouth. "You sure about this?" he asked. Anna nodded. "I'm not the same girl who walked out of that alley with Ethan, And if I'm going to carry what happened to me, I want it to mean something. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and cinnamon-scented candles someone had probably lit to soften the sterile feel. The director of the center, Miss Rainey, greeted them warmly, an older black woman with eyes that had seen too much and a laugh that defied it all. "I remember you," she said, clasping Anna's hands. "We were all watching your story. You shook this whole city." "I didn't want to shake it," Anna replied. "I just didn't want to disappear in it, Miss Rainey." Rainey smiled, eyes moist. "Well, baby, you didn't, and now you're here. That matters more than you know." They led Anna to a modest multi-purpose room with a mismatched rug, a whiteboard with dried marker stains, and 8 folding chairs arranged in a circle. 5 teens sat waiting, each one carrying the invisible armor of survival. Some leaned back with folded arms. One boy tapped his leg rapidly. A girl with purple braids didn't look up from her phone. Anna didn't try to impress them. She sat down, waited for silence, then said, "I'm not here to fix you. I'm not a counselor. I'm just someone who got through something. And maybe you have, too." One boy scoffed. "Yeah, you got through it with a billionaire daddy. What about the rest of us?" Anna didn't flinch. "I didn't start with a billionaire. I started in shelters, sleeping next to vending machines, hoping no one saw me cry. My mother died, scared. And I thought I would too, but I didn't. And not because someone handed me a mansion. It was because someone saw me and stayed." The boy said nothing. Anna continued, "I can't promise things will get easier, but I can promise that your voice matters, even if it shakes." The girl with the purple braids finally looked up. "That's a good line," she murmured. "It's not a line," Anna said. "It's what I had to tell myself to survive." Afterward, Richard drove her home in silence for a while before finally speaking. "You did good in there." Anna looked out the window. "I don't know if it helped." "It did," he said. "I've learned that sometimes helping doesn't look like saving. It looks like standing still with someone in the storm." She turned to him. "You ever feel like you're still in the storm?" "All the time," he said. "But I've learned to stop waiting for the thunder. Sometimes the quiet is real." Anna leaned back, letting his words settle like rain. Later that week, Anna received an invitation to speak at a citywide youth advocacy conference. They wanted her on the opening panel alongside young leaders who'd overcome addiction, homelessness, violence. Richard hesitated at first, not because he doubted her, but because he knew what exposure caused. "You don't owe the world your pain," he reminded her. "I know," Anna said, "but I want to offer my voice not as a story, but as proof that broken doesn't mean finished." The day of the conference arrived, and the city auditorium buzzed with hundreds of attendees, educators, social workers, teens from every borough. Anna wore a simple black blouse and jeans, no stage makeup, no polish, just her truth. When it was her turn, she stepped to the mic. "My name is Anna Camilla Green," she began. "You might have seen my face on a headline, but headlines only tell part of the story. The rest lives in the moments no one sees." She took a breath, eyes scanning the audience. "I used to think my life started the day someone saved me, but it didn't. It started the day I stopped pretending I didn't need saving." A murmur of affirmation swept through the crowd. "I met someone who didn't turn away, who didn't treat me like a project or a problem. He just stood with me until I remembered I was worth standing for." She paused, then smiled slightly. "Now, I want to be that person for someone else." Applause thundered across the auditorium, not because of performance, but because of resonance. Anna had cracked open the air and let the light in. Backstage, a young boy approached her. He was maybe 13, with weary eyes and a deep scar along his temple. "You said something up there," he said quietly, "about remembering your worth standing for." Anna nodded. "I haven't felt that in a long time." Anna knelt to his level. "Then, maybe you need someone to stand with you now. Until you do." He didn't cry, he just nodded. And that was enough. Back home, Richard received an email from a school principal in Queens. "I saw the clip of Anna's talk. Would she be open to visiting our students? We have a lot of kids like her. They could use someone who speaks their language, not just the grammar, but the grammar of survival. Richard showed it to Anna. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the photo on the living room wall, her and Ethan in the garden, grinning with dirt-covered hands and tulip bulbs in their palms. "I think this is how it starts," she said. "What does?" Richard asked. "The kind of change that sticks. One room at a time," he smiled. "Then we better get you a calendar." One evening after another visit to Hollow Creek, Anna sat with Loretta on the front porch, wrapped in a shared blanket as fireflies blinked in the garden. "You're different," Loretta said. "Good different, solid different, rooted different." Anna thought for a moment. "I don't feel finished." "You're not," Loretta replied. "None of us are. But baby, you're no longer just surviving. You're living." Anna closed her eyes and let the words sink in. She remembered all the places she'd slept where safety was a myth, all the meals where hunger lingered afterward, all the nights she lay awake wondering if her mother's blood would be her fate. But now there was laughter in the halls, shared meals, warmth that wasn't conditional, and love real, steady human love, not performative, not transactional. And she was offering it back piece by piece, word by word, to every kid still standing in the storm, waiting for someone to see them. The fight wasn't over, but Anna was no longer just the girl who survived it. She was the voice that could carry others through it. The summer sun poured gently through the windows of the Bennett home, casting soft golden hues across the wooden floors. It was the kind of day people often took for granted, ordinary in the best way. Anna stood by the hallway mirror, adjusting the necklace Loretta had given her that morning. A single pendant hung from it, engraved with a simple phrase, "Still standing." Downstairs, Richard waited by the door, holding 2 travel mugs of tea. Ethan bounced behind him, his backpack slung lazily over one shoulder. "You ready, Miss Guest Speaker?" Richard asked, his eyes full of warmth and mischief. Anna rolled her eyes but smiled. As ill ever be. They were headed to Rosewood High School in the Bronx, a place that had recently launched a program for at-risk youth. The principal had invited Anna not just to speak, but to help design a mentorship program. What started as a single invitation had grown into a movement, one student, one story, one moment at a time. On the ride there, the streets of New York flashed by, familiar, chaotic, alive. Anna watched as neighborhoods shifted from luxury storefronts to faded brick buildings and back again. She could trace her past along these streets like a map drawn in memory. "Do you think it ever really ends?" she asked, turning to Richard. "What?" "The feeling that something bad is waiting just around the corner." Richard considered her words. "I don't think it ends. I think we just stop letting it control the way we walk around the corner." She nodded, then looked out the window again, her hand brushing against the necklace. Rosewood High buzzed with the energy of teens trying to act unimpressed. As Anna entered the auditorium, several students glanced up from their phones, their curiosity hidden behind practiced boredom. But when she took the stage, no podium, no notes, just a stool and a steady voice, something shifted. She began not with her story, but with a question. "How many of you have ever wanted to disappear, not because you hated life, but because life kept forgetting you existed?" Hands didn't shoot up, but she saw the stillness, the silence, the way some eyes blinked faster, some shoulders stiffened. That was enough. "I used to think silence was the safest place," Anna continued. "If I didn't speak, no one could use my words against me. But silence is where fear grows. And the longer you stay quiet, the more you start to believe the lies." She told them about Ethan, about the alley, about the night she dialed a stranger's number and changed her life. She didn't glorify it. She didn't make herself the hero. She made it real, tangible. By the end, the room was still not silent in discomfort, but in solidarity. One girl raised her hand. "What if no one ever shows up?" Anna stepped down from the stage, walking toward her. "Then you keep surviving until someone does. And while you wait, remember, you're not invisible just because others refuse to look." Afterward, a boy named Malik approached her. He was 15, tall and thin, with old eyes and a fresh scar across his cheek. "You talked about trust," he said. "How do you rebuild it when it's been broken too many times?" Anna didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out one of the blank notebooks she always carried. On the inside cover she wrote, "Day 1, I am still here." She handed it to him. "Start by trusting that." Back at home, Richard received a letter in the mail handwritten, the penmanship wobbly but deliberate. It was from Anna's biological grandmother, a woman neither of them had heard from since the adoption. She'd seen Anna's latest talk online, said she cried for hours, said she regretted not fighting harder for her daughter. For Anna, she didn't ask for forgiveness. She only asked if one day Anna might be willing to meet. Richard showed the letter to Anna that evening. She read it quietly, expression unreadable. After a long silence, she said, "Not yet, but someday." Richard nodded. "Your pace, your call." She smiled. "Always." In the weeks that followed, Anna began organizing a summer workshop for girls in foster care. It was small, 10 students, a donated space, a few volunteers, but to her, it was sacred ground. The first session opened with a circle. She didn't ask for their traumas. She asked for their names, their favorite smells, their dream jobs. "You're not defined by what broke you," she told them. "You're defined by what you build after." One girl asked, "What if I don't know what I want to build?" Anna smiled. "Then, well, figure it out together." One evening in late August, the family gathered on the rooftop terrace to watch the sunset. Loretta brought peach cobbler. Ethan played an old Motown record he found in a thrift store. The city stretched out before them like a promise. Richard raised a glass of sparkling cider. "To peace. To finding home," Loretta added. "To peach cobbler," Ethan said, grinning. Anna raised her glass last. "To being seen fully, even when it's messy." They clinked glasses, laughter rising into the warm air. Afterward, Anna sat beside Richard, both of them watching as the skyline shimmered in gold and blush. "You know," she said, "I used to think the worst thing was being alone, but it's not. What is it then? Being surrounded by people and still feeling invisible." Richard nodded slowly. "And now I know the best thing is being seen by someone who refuses to look away." He reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." "I know," Anna whispered, and for the first time in her life she believed it without hesitation. That night, Anna opened a fresh notebook. On the first page she wrote, "I am not a headline. I am not a statistic. I am not the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I am a girl with scars, with strength, with stories. I am still standing, and now I choose to rise." She closed the notebook, placed it beside her bed, and turned off the light. Outside, the city pulsed with life, and somewhere in another quiet room, a child waited to be seen. Anna would be ready. The story of Anna teaches us that healing doesn't begin when someone rescues you. It begins when you believe you are worth being rescued. It reminds us that even the most broken beginnings can lead to powerful transformations when met with compassion, consistency, and courage. Through Anna's journey, we learn the importance of being present for others, not as saviors, but as steady hands and open hearts. Ultimately, it is a story about reclaiming one's voice, standing in truth, and becoming a beacon for those still lost in the storm. Here's a version rewritten and expanded in a more natural, expressive style, as a native English speaker might tell it, "Who want to hurt kids like me. Not because we did anything wrong, but because we remind them of the truth that we exist, that we have voices, that we remember what happened." She stared directly into one of the cameras, her voice unwavering. "If you're out there watching and you're one of them, just know this: you're not hiding in the shadows anymore, and neither are we." That night, the video exploded online. But something else happened, too. An anonymous tip landed in the inbox of a local journalist who had been quietly keeping tabs on Anna's story from the very beginning. Attached were photos, audio recordings, and documents, a whole pile of evidence linking Reggie to a series of extortion attempts stretching back 5 years. One of them involved a single mother who vanished under incredibly suspicious circumstances. The reporter didn't hesitate for long, just long enough to make sure the information checked out. Then he dropped the story at midnight. By the time the sun came up, Reggie's face was plastered all over every news channel in the city, and by noon, he was in handcuffs. Anna was curled up on the couch, her knees pulled close to her chest, watching the news reports unfold. The headline crawled across the bottom of the screen. Key figure in adoption harassment case arrested on federal charges. She didn't jump for joy. She didn't burst into tears. She just whispered, "It's over." Richard sat down beside her. Not all of it, but a big chunk of it. She leaned into his side, finding comfort in his presence. "That's enough for today," she murmured. Later that week, the police uncovered a hidden stash of burner phones, payment records, and a notebook Reggie had been keeping. It was a mess, scribbled and scrawled, but filled with chilling threats. Some of them were aimed at Richard, others at Malaloy, who he turned on when she refused to publish one of his later hit pieces. Reggie wasn't loyal to anyone, just driven by his own insatiable hunger for power and control. When Anna saw the notebook, she didn't even want to look inside. She just handed it to Marcus and said, simply, "Burn it. Get rid of it." And then, finally, spring started to sneak into the city, bringing longer days and lighter jackets. For the first time in months, Anna actually walked to school without the constant presence of that unmarked car tailing her every move. She was still careful, still aware of her surroundings. She still carried that little keychain alarm, just in case, but the fear wasn't weighing her down like it used to. One afternoon, after classes were done, she was sitting alone on the bleachers, lost in her notebook, scribbling away. A girl from her science class came over. "Hey," the girl said, a little shyly, "I saw your video. You're really brave." Anna looked up, surprised. "I'm trying to be." The girl hesitated for a moment. "If you ever want to, hang out, we have a book club at the library. It's small, but it's pretty cool." Anna actually smiled. "Maybe," she said, leaving the door open. The girl smiled back, clearly pleased, and then left. And just like that, a new possibility appeared, not with a loud announcement, but with the softest whisper of hope. That night, as Richard was wrapping up the final report from Marcus, he glanced out the window, watching the soft, orangey-pink light of dusk settle over the city. Anna came to stand beside him, holding 2 steaming mugs of cocoa. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. He took the mug, nodded, and took a sip. "More than okay," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. They stood there in comfortable silence for a minute. Then Anna spoke up. "You know what I'm actually scared of now?" "What?" "That I'm not going to know what to do with myself now that we're not fighting all the time." Richard looked at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes, but his voice was soft and reassuring. "Then, figure out how to live in peace together. Learn together. One day at a time," she said, nodding slowly. "Okay, but if peace gets boring, we're going to have to find a way to make it interesting." Anna laughed, and it was a real laugh. Her voice light and free, without that tight knot of fear she'd been carrying for so long. And in that moment, peace didn't feel like some distant, impossible dream. It felt like something they could actually reach for. A month went by. Spring was in full swing, painting the city in soft, vibrant colors. The tulips Richard had planted in the front garden, the ones Anna had helped him pick out at that little corner nursery, had finally started to bloom, their petals wide open and fearless, soaking up the sunlight. For the first time in what felt like forever, the Bennett house felt calm and settled, not like a fortress waiting for an attack, but like a home where they could all finally breathe. But even the most comforting silence can still hold echoes of the past, and some echoes just refuse to fade away completely. They linger, waiting for the right moment. One Saturday morning, Anna was up in the attic, rummaging through boxes of old craft supplies, when she stumbled across a box labeled Camilla, her mother's name, written in Loretta's careful, precise handwriting. She sat down on the dusty floor, cross-legged, letting the sunlight stream in through the small, round attic window. She opened the box and looked inside. It was filled with letters, dozens of them. Some opened and read, others still sealed shut. They weren't addressed to anyone in particular, just pages and pages filled with ink, her mother's voice, frozen in time. "Dear baby," one of them began. "I don't even know if you'll ever read this, but today you turned 3 years old. You smiled at me like I was still worthy of being loved, and it just broke me all over again." Anna kept reading, her eyes starting to sting with tears. Each letter was like a quiet, painful confession. Her mother hadn't just left behind a legacy of pain. She had left behind something real, something flawed and imperfect, but undeniably real. That night, Anna brought the box of letters downstairs. She set it on the kitchen island where Richard was putting the finishing touches on a speech he was giving at some upcoming fundraiser. "She wrote these for me," Anna said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think, in a way, she was writing them for herself, too." Richard looked up, sensing the weight of what she was sharing. "Can I read them?" he asked, gently. Anna nodded. "Just not tonight," she said. He understood. Some kinds of healing need the quiet darkness of midnight, not the bright light and the pressure of company. A few days later, Ethan came home from school looking unusually down. He just flopped onto the couch, his backpack hitting the floor with a thud. Anna sat down next to him, pulling her knees up to her chest, mirroring his posture. "You okay?" she asked, concerned. He just nodded, sort of. You want to talk about it?" she pressed gently. Ethan hesitated, clearly conflicted. "Some kids at lunch, they were talking about you again, saying that your dad only adopted you because it makes him look good, that it was all just a big publicity stunt." Anna didn't even flinch. Not anymore. She'd come too far to let those kinds of words hurt her like they used to. "And what did you say?" she asked him, her voice calm and steady. "I told them that they didn't know anything," he said, his voice filled with anger, "that you saved my life, that I wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for you." A small, genuine smile touched Anna's lips. "You're a good brother, Ethan." He looked at her, his expression softening. "You're the best one I've got, Anna." Richard decided that they all needed a break, a change of scenery. He booked a weekend retreat up in the mountains, in a quiet little cabin, far away from the city. No phones, no cameras, just fresh air, peace, and time to reconnect. Loretta came along, too, and she spent the whole weekend baking cornbread in a cast-iron skillet and telling them stories about her summers growing up in Mississippi. One evening, while Ethan and Richard were inside playing cards, Loretta and Anna sat on the porch swing, watching the stars slowly appear in the darkening sky. "Your mama," Loretta began, her voice thoughtful. "She was the strongest weak person I ever knew, and I mean that with all the love in my heart. She had this fire inside her, but it ended up burning her up, too." Anna just listened, quietly. Loretta went on. "When she found out she was pregnant with you, she told me she was terrified, not of being a mother, but of not being good enough, of not being able to give you what you deserved." "She was enough," Anna whispered, her voice filled with conviction. "She was," Loretta agreed. "She just never believed it herself. But you, baby, you carry all the best parts of her. You carry her fighting spirit, her determination to survive. But you also carry your own peace, your own ability to find joy in the world. That's something she never quite managed to find." Anna leaned her head on Loretta's shoulder, finding comfort in her warmth and wisdom. "Sometimes," she said, "I hear her in my dreams. She's just humming, no words, just a melody. That's memory," Loretta said softly. "That's love, echoing back through time." The following week, Richard was asked to speak at the West Bridge Foundation's annual gala, standing before a crowd of wealthy donors and community leaders. His speech was short and heartfelt, but the thing that really resonated with the audience, the thing they remembered most, wasn't what he said. It was what Anna did. She stood up in the middle of dinner, walked to the podium without being asked, without any kind of announcement. She just took the microphone and began to speak. "My name is Anna Green," she said, her voice as solid and unwavering as stone. "Some of you know me. Some of you just know about me. And there's a big difference between those two things." A hush fell over the room. All eyes were on her, captivated by her strength and her vulnerability. "I've been the headline. I've been the girl with the troubled past, but I'm so much more than just what happened to me. I'm more than what people did, or didn't do, to help me." She glanced at Richard, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. "I'm a sister, a daughter, a survivor, and I'm building something new, something better, both inside myself and in the world around me." She paused, letting her words sink in. "If you came here tonight to write a check, that's great. Thank you. But if you came here thinking that you're somehow saving someone, I want you to think again. We don't need saviors. We need people who are willing to stay, people who won't run away when the story gets messy and complicated." And with that, she stepped down from the podium and returned to her seat. The applause that followed wasn't just polite clapping. It was a thunderous ovation, like the standing ovation at the end of a powerful symphony. It was earned, resonant, and lasting. That night, after they got home from the gala, Richard tucked Ethan into bed and then went to check on Anna. He found her sitting at her desk, with one of her mother's letters in her hand. He knew she was thinking about love and how hard it can be to let yourself truly believe it's real. Richard walked over and stood beside her. "And do you believe it?" he asked, his voice full of love. Anna looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I finally do." He knelt down beside her, so they were at eye level. She put the letter back in the box, then turned to look out the window. "It's almost summer," she said, a hint of wonder in her voice. "It feels like everything is starting to bloom." "It is," Richard agreed. "Even us, Anna." Anna smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. Then, quietly, she added, "You know what I want to do next? What I really want to do?" "What's that?" he asked, his eyes full of anticipation. "I want to help someone else, not as some kind of project, not as some way to can